Good morning, and can I welcome to the 17th meeting of the Education and Culture Committee in 2013. Can I remind all those present to ensure that all electronic devices are switched off at all times, particularly phones, because they do interfere with the sound system. Our first item this morning is whether to take item 4, consideration of our annual report in private. Do members agree? Thank you. Our next item is to take oral evidence on our inquiry into decision making on whether to take children into care. The themes of this session are neglect and permanence, which may cover more specific issues such as joint decision making and partnership working, and of course different placement options. Can I welcome to the committee this morning Tom McGee, Managing Director, Spark of Genius, Scottish Children's Services Coalition, Matt Ford, Director of NSPCC Scotland, Mark Ballard, Head of Policy, Barnardo's Scotland, Barbara Hudson, Director, British Association for Adoption and Fostering, John Stevenson, Representative from Social Work Issues Group Unison, and Ruth Stark, Manager, Scottish Association of Social Work. Thank you for coming along this morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is our final evidence session, oral evidence session, I should say, before our event in June in the Parliament on the 17th of June, and then, of course, we'll have the Minister in front of the committee towards the end of June. So I'm hoping that as we reach this point in the proceedings, we are going to try and focus on solutions rather than problems. That's just a bit of a hint there, if you could help us. But apart from that, obviously we've got some time this morning to try and cover the main issues, and I'm hoping that we can get through quite a lot this morning. Can I remind members of the panel they don't have to answer every question. If you don't have anything specific to add, it would be helpful if we can get through the issues. But obviously, if you've got a contribution to make, please indicate, and of course I will call you to speak. The one question I wanted to start off with, I think, goes back to some of the fundamentals of the reasons why I suppose we undertook this inquiry, and it's to ask about the length of time it takes for a young person or a child to be taken into care. When we spoke to some young people about their experiences of the care system, almost universally, if not actually all of them in fact, said that they felt it took far too long from the point at which they were initially in contact with professionals and it was identified that they had problems in a particular family to the point at which they were taken into care was far, far too long. Do you agree that the balance that we have at the moment in terms of the rights of the child, the rights of the parent, the length of time it takes to remove somebody from a parental home is about right? Or do you agree with those young people that it still takes far too long? Tom?
I think that members of the coalition would probably say that early intervention, I think most people here would probably agree, is something that we should be pushing for. We see a lot of pressure on the local authorities at different levels not to take children into care or place them in expensive, often residential solutions. And that funding pressure, if anything, is becoming more prevalent. They would always, local authorities, seek to place the young person in the best situation possible. But because of funding constraints, there's more and more pressure on everyone in the setup, from directors of social work downwards, and that's something which we need to think about and we need to look for different solutions on.
Was that a yes or a no, Tom?
I think young people would probably benefit if it was done more quickly and they found appropriate placement solutions for them, which didn't change. That would be the way to go on that one. Quite how you do that would be partly to do with resources and partly to do with potentially a change in ethos in local authorities on the ground and dealing with day-to-day problems.
Mark?
I think it's a clear yes from Barnardo's Scotland. Talking to the children and young people we work with, they've told us the same things that they've told the committee, that delays are too long. Talking in particular to our foster carers, and I know the convener of the committee met with Barnardo's foster carers, their experience is that they see at first hand the impact of delay and the negative impact this has on the children and young people that they are supporting as foster carers. If I can jump ahead slightly, the convener asked for solutions, and I think there are opportunities within the Children and Young People Bill particularly within the single child's plan process, to actually have a greater focus on an integrated model of supporting and assessing what is in the best interest of the child, on maximising the child's well-being. And I think that, I hope, is going to be something that forms part of the solution to this problem. I'd also like to highlight that there is good practice in local authorities around Scotland. Barnardo's works very closely with Fife. We've got a Barnardo's assessment tool which we use with Fife, which means that there's a greater focus on the outcomes for the children and young people of decisions that are being taken, and a greater focus on children's rights, which I think is central to this, because having the supportive home environment that is so important to a child, it's a central rights issue for us, and making sure that if that can't be provided by birth parents, we move quickly to find an alternative way of supplying that is I think, a crucial rights issue.
Okay, thank you. Barbara.
My perspective on these is that there is a great lack of urgency in the system. That when concerns are identified about children, that services, generally speaking, move quite swiftly to intervene to make children safe under the umbrella of child protection. But sadly, once a child has left their family, there is what we would count a degree of drift once children become looked after and accommodated. And that drift emanates from a whole number of factors, some of which I think are addressable in the short term and some which will take medium to long-term solutions. One of the committee's questions is, do we know about outcomes? Is there much research? And my contention, and our organisation's contention, is there is no lack of material and information about what happens to children who have been exposed to drug and alcohol abuse by their mother whilst in utero, who suffer separation, loss, abuse and neglect as children, if they are not secured in a reparative therapeutic environment, whether that's their own family who kind of comes up to the mark, or alternative families or residential provision, and that needs to be done as soon as possible for children and to be provided consistently throughout their childhood, adolescence and beyond. You know, probably most of us here today are living proof of what children need in terms of, you know, a well-resourced childhood and adolescence. What we struggle to do organisationally is to address those issues for children with any degree of urgency. And sadly, the younger the child, the more time people think they have to address the issues. And so this dreadful approach is taken about second and third chances, and we'll see what we can do, and maybe things will be better. And all my colleagues here today in their evidence have identified there is no shortage of assessment frameworks, there is no shortage of knowledge, but somehow these things appear to be negotiable and people can pick and choose whether they want to use the material, research and information that's available. There is no clear hand on the tiller in terms of charting a child's progress once they become looked after and accommodated. If we were to think each night about the children that we care for, we would probably have, you know, maybe 15 or 20. Who thinks each night about the children who are looked after and accommodated and wonders what they're going to experience in the morning? And that lack of a really robust awareness, which means that things happen, is something which we think we need to address structurally.
Thank you very much. John.
I mean, I agree almost entirely with everything that's been said at the moment. I would point to one bit, which is resources, and we can't get away from that. And the experience of our members is that when practice teams and the frontline social workers are fully resourced, early intervention comes as a matter of course. But early intervention is often seen as low threshold. In fact, early intervention can be picking up a very high threshold, but very early. And so the lesson for or the feedback we've had from many people is that as staffing got better and there were better resources in the front line, actually the number of children coming into care went up. And that's because they were spotting the problems early, they were acting quicker on those things. The next step, however, becomes more and more difficult because there's a presumption in law that children should be with their families. And the systems in general are very reticent to allow social workers to take early decisions on these. And, you know, I've heard myself at children's hearings, I've seen safeguarding reports that have said, you know, the child is young, there's still time. And it's very difficult to get the argument across that there's not time, that damage is almost irreparable if we don't manage to do it quickly enough. So the whole system needs to understand that bit, I think. But in addition, I think we have a further logjam, if you like, and that's when we can get further into the legal system. And yes, there are problems in local authorities with social work staff having time to complete the complex reports that are required for moving children onto permanency. And that's been identified in SCRA's research as an issue. And that's a resource issue too. But there's also an enormous difficulty once you get into the court system. And children, almost universally, the courts are very reticent to allow a child to be moved during that process. So a child can wait for a very, very long time to get into the settled placement that was planned for their future. And when you look at the evidence, it was almost inevitable. So all of these things conspire together to create delays in the system.
Ruth?
I think, for me, though, there are some issues about the rights of the child. And one of the rights of the child is also to know and be with their family if that is at all possible. And that actually underpins the law. And one of the difficulties that John has just talked about in terms of it isn't just about the child coming into care, there then have to be checks and balances. And I think sometimes when I hear people talking about, yes, we have to move speedily on, we sometimes forget that that is also a right of the child to know their parents and, if possible, to be with their parents. That is contained in the Convention. For me, the big issue is that for a lot of the children that are there in the care system, they're there because there has been a breakdown in the relationships between themselves and their parents. And what we are planning to do at as an outcome for the children when they grow up into adulthood is that they are able, when they grow up, to make and sustain relationships. And that is a hugely complex task. And if you look at the recent research from England in relation to one of the identifying factors that's come out is that building that ability for children and young people to build relationships is incredibly important. But they can only do that if they have human contact with people like their social workers and their care workers. And one of the issues for our members has been the increasing time spent in meetings, the increasing time spent filling in forms, the long forms that I now have to read as a safeguarder in relation to children who are going to the children's hearings. And, you know, what would be in years past a good and analytical 4-page report now is 25, 30 pages long of repetition and narrative. And I think that somehow we have moved from that very important task of the social worker to listen to the child, to hear the child, to advocate for the child, has somehow got lost in people having to justify their decision-making at all kinds of levels at a way that has become disproportionate to the task that we really have to do, and that is to listen to the children and to listen to the families. And so I think there's a whole stage before we get to the child coming into care, which is about what can we do to prevent that actually happening. And I think that one of the issues for me is about allowing social workers to do the job that they ought to be trained to do, which is to actually work with very complex situations. And I don't see that happening at the moment for the members of our association.
Matt?
I agree that children wait too long in situations where they're experiencing abuse and neglect. And I think that way back at the start of this committee, this inquiry, I remember a question being put about is the pendulum swung too far one way from another way. And I think the answer is it has swung too far. It's been driven by a lot of different things, including the huge impact on children of parental substance misuse and alcohol problems and other parental problems. But to continue to focus on problems for a minute, you know, especially for younger children, you know, a lot of our processes are about, you know, waiting to see if we can make things better at a point in a child's life when they can only suffer really serious long-term harm. They've got impoverished home situations where they're experiencing the kind of care that marks them for life. You know, a child that's learned not to cry, because if they cry, the consequences are too frightening and too unpredictable. And that child then eventually, because of the processes of child protection, eventually it becomes clear that things aren't going to get better. But that very young child goes into foster care and is already in a situation where they need seriously skilled care and help. And it's not obvious that that's going to happen in our current system. So I think, yes, it's swung too far, but I think we also know that there's well-documented problems in the way that social workers in particular, but also professionals in general, approach families. The rule of optimism, you may have heard evidence around that, the idea that people look for ways that the family might make some more progress and delay a decision. Now, there's actually no problem in my mind with saying, okay, the care is not good enough right now, and it may be able to be improved, but right now that child can't stay there. But I think after that, then families do need therapeutic help and every support they can get to see if they can come up to the mark. You know, a child coming into the care need not be the end of the matter. But we also know that even then we get it wrong. A huge proportion of children, there's research showing a huge proportion of children who come into care and go home again then suffer further abuse and neglect, and that's not an acceptable situation. But what we do know is that social workers actually have knowledge of the sorts of things that are important. They have knowledge that there are ways of assessing, there are plenty of assessment frameworks and tools. They lack confidence in doing it. It's not consistently there. So I think there is something that positive to be said about a much stronger focus on equipping and training social workers and requiring the use of evidence-based techniques for assessing the quality of relationship that a child is experiencing. So that we can really be clear that a child is suffering neglect or abuse and that we can intervene.
Thank you all very much. I think that's an exceptionally interesting start to this morning's proceedings, and I'm sure we'll get into some of the detail now, but can I call first Claire Adamson?
Convener, good morning. You've already touched on the area that I wanted to ask about, which was support for families, and given a lot of the evidence that we have seen about the looked after children at home, and also concerns about children who are taken out of the family situation and returned without any real work being done on the problems within the family to actually address what's been going wrong. So the question is really, looking to the future, can we do things better and more consistently, and who are the best people to actually be delivering that support for the families?
I think there's a lot that we could do better. I think some of it's been touched on, but if I pick up the first point, I mean, the families who have the most difficulties in offering good enough care to their children, and families where children, where they are maltreating their children, where they are abusing or neglecting their children, are quite often families that have really significant problems of their own, and the adults, particularly the mothers, are often people who are dealing with the consequences, the lifelong consequences of their own traumatic and abusive histories, particularly in early childhood. And in our experience, we have a service that we're running in Glasgow for children in foster care, which is aimed at providing a really, really robust assessment for families, so that the decision about whether the child should go home or go into an adoptive placement can be based on the best possible evidence. But what we also do is we offer every single family in those circumstances a programme of treatment after the assessment phase, And the assessment is entirely about looking at the relationship between, the quality of the relationship between the infant and the parent. We also then formulate a programme of treatment for these people, because they are families that need help. And whether their child is able to go home or not, these families need help. There are also families that are liable to go on and have other children. So in our current system, we all know about the phenomenon of a family where they have a child, the child is eventually taken into care, and the process is repeated, they have another child. Nothing's changed. We quite often go through as lengthy a process with that second child, and there are the kind of stories, sadly, that aren't urban myths, that are true, of very large numbers of children that are come out of individual families. And what that tells you is there's something that needs to be done that is about addressing the very real needs of people who have very significant problems. And there are a number of areas that could be improved. I mean, one of them is, as I've said, is the skill and confidence of workers in working on those relationships. The second is access for those adults to really skilled therapeutic help, and adult mental health services, if they were extended to these families, that child protection itself was an indicator that their mental health needed to be looked at, is an area that we think is worth exploring. And I think, lastly, the ability, the point that's been made about resources, but there's something about workers having time to get alongside and have a relationship with families. So a lot of what we do at the moment is like monitoring. It's almost like surveillance to see how a child protection plan has elements of support in it. But when you look at a lot of child protection plans, they're really about assessing what's going on, and not so much about changing what's going on. And so the assessing what's going on could be much better focused with workers had more time, more skill and more confidence, so they could look at the actual relationship, but also they could be working to... families don't know what it is they're doing wrong sometimes, and they go through a whole process. And I know you've heard from Professor Bridget Daniel. She spoke at an NSPCC conference recently, and what she was saying is that families where there's neglect, they don't really know what it is the social worker's asking them to change. And social workers need time, they need relationships with these families. So I think there's some really focused areas where improvement could be made around training, confidence, skill, time.
I think the issue about assessment, the issue about skills on the front line, the issue about relationships, they're all things there that can be mobilised with a bit of time. But there are situations where very simple practical supports, if they were available through the general universal services for parents, especially in relation to drug use, where there is motivation from the family to change, but there's no resource for them to go to exercise that change. That's a big issue. And our members are reporting more and more in terms of mental health issues, where we are ending up taking some children into care that I believe, with the proper services around, shouldn't needed to have come into care if the parents could have had the mental health support that was required in the community. Having said all that, many social workers know and can evidence and can explain in detail why a child can't safely be cared for at home. The person you've got to convince at the end of the day is very often a sheriff. And when you're in court with that kind of evidence, social workers' evidence is not treated, in my view, is not treated with the legitimacy that the evidence from the medical profession or from psychologists or from a whole range of other people. And we've often go through very analytical and evidence reports going to court, and all they say, despite all that, they say, no, we'll have to have an independent expert look at this. And this independent expert will come in and meet the child twice, write a report about it, and the court will pay attention to it, but not to the social worker that's been working with the child for 2 years and knows them inside out, kind of thing. So there's a bit about the credibility and the relevance given to the profession by society as a whole, I think, to look at too. Did you?
Yes, I agree with much of what Matt and John have said, but in terms of the question from Claire Adamson, which is what can be done, the kind of families that Matt was talking about, where you have a family that is already getting a range of interventions because of a range of issues within that family, we have the opportunity with the Single Child's Plan in the Children and Young People's Bill to actually bring together the different agencies that are working with that family to make sure that they're acting in a more coherent fashion, that information is effectively being shared, that issues are being worked on collectively, not separately by health looking at a parental mental health problem, while simultaneously social worker looking at the issues faced by the child, but actually an opportunity to join that together. So I think there's something really important potentially in the Children and Young People's Bill to deal with some of the problems that Matt and John in particular have highlighted, because we need that more consistent approach to supporting families at all stages. I think it's very welcome that community planning partnerships will have as one of their 4 strategic objectives early years, because there does need to be that universal approach to supporting families before problems get to the stage where a child's plan might be required. So I think we've got to get a more integrated approach to making sure that we use universal services more effectively, and targeted interventions when they're coming into the same family are coherent.
Ruth and then Tom.
You can't legislate for good practice. And actually what's just been described is about good practice. If you go back to the Child Protection Report, it's everybody's job to make sure I'm all right. You'll find exactly the same conclusion is in there. And it highlighted that when a case is well coordinated, usually by the social worker, you can actually keep a child in their home safely. This is about good practice. It isn't about what might or might not be in a bill. Because if you don't resource a bill, then you don't get the opportunity to have the good practice. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on was something that Matt raised about, and John raised about, adults' mental health. And there's an extremely good report that's just been published by the Mental Welfare Commission called Parents Who Are Detained. And it talks about the lack of coordination between mental health services and children's services in relation to young people. And I would commend that you read that, because it's really, really straightforward and simple about how we need to coordinate some of the information that we're collecting in our little silos that we have created. Unfortunately, post-68, when we did invest in a generic system that was supposed to be bridging these the information gaps between the various silos, and we somehow have come back into the silos, because that's managerially a better way of trying to manage things, but it isn't actually serving the people who are using our services, because they have very complex needs. And it doesn't matter whether you're talking about health and social care, or whether you're talking about children's services, or whether you're talking about criminal justice, it's the same issue.
Well, that's the problem. Claire asked about working with families after kids have left care. And the biggest problem that Spark of Genius and organisations like us have is that the kids are pretty beaten up before they join us. They've had multiple placement breakdowns, they've had big issues in their lives. And that's a massive problem. I totally take on board Ruth's point, of course, with the rights of the child and the ability of social workers to try and keep them within the family. It's absolutely on the money. But that's the single biggest issue. Even when they're with us for a number of years and they do incredibly well, they then have to go back to family homes sometimes. And I was really impressed by Matt's project when he talked about working with families after care. We've tried to do the same thing as well, and we're constantly reminded by social work departments that we've got an aftercare department to do that, we've got through care guys that do that. But actually what they tend to be doing is monitoring the situation. So to come to the solution, what we think is important is a shake-up. It's a new way of thinking about looking after these young people. And that means strategic commissioning. That means looking at the type of kids that we've got, where they're coming from, proper evidence-based information which allows you to plan for the future. And very importantly in that, we look at the roles of local authorities and we encourage them to seek additional partnerships with different types of people who can deliver different types of solutions. And there's not too much of that happening just now. And that would, I think, help at both sides of the spectrum. Young people joining after multiple placement breakdowns would become hopefully fewer, and their ability to look after families and young people who are being in care afterwards would be stronger if we have a shake-up and a look at the way we're doing things. We haven't actually done the research on this. It's almost certain, you should watch what I'm saying, the services who care for children in residential situations just now, who are dealing with younger children, even if they've been to hell and back, if they're younger, you've got a longer time to work with them, are probably getting better grades on the whole from the care inspectorate than people who are having to look after a 15, 16-year-old with 12, 15 placement breakdowns in the last year or two. And there's a number of homes with those type of kids in it. So early intervention and post-care are crucial, but we think it requires a strategic commissioning look at how to change things for the longer term.
Can I ask just hopefully a very brief question and hopefully brief answers, you don't mind, but in the SCRA report, they looked at children on supervision for more than 5 years, and they talked about the support services that were put in place when they were at home. And I just want to quote from the 2012 report. It says, the number of children reported as displaying emotional and behavioural difficulties almost doubled whilst on supervision requirements at home. Is that because it was the wrong supervision requirements? Is it because those children should have been removed from the home earlier? Why is it the case that the support services were put in place and yet things got twice as bad? Anybody want to express a view on that? John?
I would venture a view that children shouldn't be on supervision for 5 years. Supervision ain't working, you know, if it requires to be a compulsory. Remember, supervision is only there where the family in a situation where compulsory measures are required. And if you require compulsory measures for 5 years, there's something going far wrong there. So that's about decision making. But you can't tell from the SCRA report whether the decision making is at the practitioner end or whether it's at the children's hearing end, not wanting to grasp the nettle of the recommendation. That's the bit we need to know more about.
I think that, just to echo something John said about 5 years is probably too long, because if a child is subject to supervision, who is responsible for that child? Who does the child experience as the person who is concerned about them and is offering care as well as boundaries and discipline? How do the parents, how does it feel to be a parent where every so often you have to go somewhere for people to see how you're doing and to sort of take a view? That is a scrutiny process, but also it builds in unpredictability and insecurity to the system. Well, maybe this time they might make a different decision. Well, you know, if this doesn't happen, then maybe that will happen. I don't think any of us would feel very comfortable about trying to bring our children up in a situation where we're constantly having to defer to another forum in terms of what we do. So, you know, either supervision, methods of supervision is there to empower people to become the parents that their children need so that they're able to do the business, or, you know, supervision is there to say, for a limited amount of time, we will help you do this. Because what else is it for? It can't operate as a kind of like, you know, year-on-year sort of oversight of children's well-being and welfare. I think it was only ever intended, that the supervision was only ever intended to be a means to an end and not an end in itself. And that, sadly, is what supervision requirements seem to have become.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, can I ask Neil Bibby to come in here?
Thanks, Kim. Now, I just wanted to ask about the availability and quality of alternative care placements. There's been concern suggested about a lack of placements for alternative care can mean that children don't get the best placement. For example, Glasgow Council's submission stated we often place children in the only available placement rather than being able to offer a choice of placement options which better meet need. It's also been suggested that local authorities look at the price of care rather than the suitability and fit of care. I just wanted to ask why you think that is the case, what you think should happen, what factors should be considered, and how do we ensure those factors are considered, and children get the most suitable care placement.
Just refer you to the Edinburgh inquiry in 1999. One of the recommendations was that all units, the council units, should be operating below their maximum, so that there would be an active choice as to where to place a child. Well, that's never happened anywhere. You know, nothing came of that from 1999 onwards. So very often, and the experience of a frontline social worker is you will get the placement that's available and not the placement that you're choosing. But there is a financial issue, because, you know, out of authority placements can cost, you know, 100, 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 pounds a year. Even an authority the size of Edinburgh, you only need 3 or 4 kids in that position to be a pressure on the budget. If you're Borders or Clackmannan or somewhere like that, and you have a child in that kind of placement, it can take up a third, you know, well, an eighth or something of your whole budget. So the money is a reality, and our experience is that yes, local authorities do look at money when they're making placements. They also look at outcomes too, and value for money kind of structures within that. And just price is not always an indicator of quality in terms of it, but it's a reality. You know, any local authority tells you they're not looking at money when they're making placements. It's not telling you the truth. It's a reality, but they are significant sums. So it can't just be, you know, you can't just talk about it purely on choice, because there's a level of affordability there.
I'd just like to talk a little bit about the family placement resources, so talking about foster placements and permanent foster placements and adoptive placements. I don't know who it was who said that the price of peace is eternal vigilance, but the cost of having enough resources is constant recruitment. You constantly have to be recruiting foster carers in order to have enough foster carers to be able to have a choice. John's talked about residential care. My experience in family-based care has been very rarely in my career have I ever had a choice of placements, that you have to operate a service, as it were, with just enough. But in order to maintain that, you have to be constantly recruiting your carers, and that applies to foster carers and indeed for adoptive carers. So there are a number of challenges there. The first is sustaining your existing foster carers in terms of support, allowances, other more practical forms of support to foster carers, and valuing the work that foster carers do, and that doesn't get any easier. But also you have to get a message out there that people are still needed, and that people shouldn't rule themselves out, because we need a very wide range of people with skills and capacities to do that. And at the same time, you need to have available staff time and energy to actually prepare, assess and support those people. So there is a huge task to simply keep that resource pool growing. There's been a growth in the independent provider sector, who have demonstrated what you can achieve if you have a wraparound service, and local authorities are somewhat late in the day, I think, probably recognising that they can also provide a wraparound service, because social work departments sit within local authorities that have housing, education, leisure services available to them. So there is this huge challenge about recruiting and sustaining sufficient family-based resources so that you are able to offer that to those children that you think will be able to take advantage of that. Family-based care is not a panacea, and there is no such thing as the right family. Families become the families that children need if they get the right support and training as they go through the piece. And that comes not just from social work, but from health and colleagues in education. So for me, the challenge of securing resources to children is you have to constantly invest in recruitment.
Tom?
This whole issue about the cost of care is something which has been looked at before by Audit Scotland a couple of years ago, 2010 I think it was, and it never seems to go away. most social workers, every social worker I've ever met, and virtually every local authority wants the best for every child who's placed in a care situation. That's their first biggest driver. They want the best thing, the best outcomes for the kids. But they always automatically assume that they have to fill the places within their own local authority provision first, irregardless of whether that particular home is any good for the kid or not. And there's some discussion about that sometimes with my social work colleagues in local authorities, but that's our point of view, and it's probably fairly accurate. This is despite the fact that local authorities don't know what their care costs, and it almost certainly costs more than many external providers, almost certainly. For a start, they don't have the actual figures. They could not come into this committee just now and put their hand on their heart and tell you exactly what a care place costs. They might tell you what the direct costs could potentially be, but they forget little things like education, overheads, and all the rest of it. External providers have to give to the penny what care costs. And some of these places are very expensive. John talks about hundreds of thousands of pounds, and there are occasionally places like that for particularly needy kids. But the start point of this conversation should really be about reality. And right now, external providers can point to the reality of what things cost them. And Scotland Excel are involved in a big exercise just now, a procurement exercise designed to find out even more about that if they can. And good luck to them in that sense. But the 40% of provision for external residential care which local authorities provide isn't costed. It's like going to a painter and saying, how much would it cost to paint my house, mate? I'll do it for 100 quid. You go to the direct works department in the local authority. I don't know. I'll get back to you on that. And you give him the job anyway. It's ludicrous.
I just want to raise 2 points. The first was, in a dim distant past, I did actually coordinate multidisciplinary assessments for some of the most distressed children in Lothian region. And one of the things that I think has been lost is that kind of impartial assessment that can go on, where you start with the views of the person who's actually caring for the child, who knows the child, and you end up through the teaching staff and the psychiatrists and wherever else, with actually a coordinated assessment of that particular child's needs. And we had, at that time, the availability of every residential school in Scotland that we could have placed a child into if we needed to, and we had that oversight. That is missing. That whole process is missing now. The second thing is to say that actually the other demographic that has changed is kinship care. That many more children are now being looked after within their extended families, but the resourcing of that, the funding of it, the supporting of it is so patchy across the country that actually has to be addressed in terms of the resourcing that goes on. Because for the children, they actually still remain within their own families, and that complies with the Convention on the Rights of the Child.
Briefly, Matt, if you don't mind.
I think foster care is really the key to this, and we need to think of foster care as mobilising the ability of people to offer that loving care to children that they need at the time they need it, which is the day they come into care. But I would point to two things that could make a difference. I recognise the picture that Glasgow City Council was painting. One of the things that imposes pressure on the foster care system is the fact that children go home again unsuccessfully and come back, so there's churn. And there's a study done in Glasgow by Helen Minnis and others that showed that 2/3 of children who went home came back into care again within a year. So you're finding a placement at the end of the day. There's children that are on a merry-go-round, and if you get decisions better, you'll reduce some of that churn. The second thing is that foster carers have the ability to help the child start to recover if they're trained and supported, and we should really value that and not see it as a business transaction. We're talking about trying to mobilise that. And some foster carers will go on and provide long-term and perhaps even go on and adopt children if they are given the opportunity to do that. So I do think we need continual focus on and valuing of, not just in monetary terms, but in terms of the importance in children's lives of good foster care.
Just very briefly, if we're talking about the cost of care, I think it's important to recognise the cost of a failure of care. This committee started its discussion of this issue looking at educational outcomes and the very poor educational outcomes. We know that a failure in the care system can lead to a failure to provide care at the right time and in the right way can lead to long-term costs in terms of health and education and access to employment in terms of the justice system. So when talking about cost, we need to balance both those things, and I think it's important to reflect on that.
Just quickly want to come back and say there are some children that I have met in my career for whom foster care is not the answer. They've got so many family members, so many people who are rooting for them but can't care for them, that actually to put them in foster care confuses them because they feel guilty about that additional kind of relationship that's going along, and for whom residential care is a much more appropriate alternative.
Just to obviously this whole issue is linked to resources, and I know there's been a number of issues raised in terms of so far, including training, support for foster carers, kinship carers as we mentioned, supporting families, parents, rehabilitation. They all suggest there is you know, a lack of resources in these areas. Given the current financial situation that we're in, where would you prioritise extra resources?
I'd prioritise extra resources going into early intervention in the early years. And people, I think people say to me, oh, there's been an awful lot of focus on younger children, isn't it time we focus on older children now? But the fact remains that the reason you've got a whole raft of children aged 10 or 12 or 14 with huge difficulties is that they suffered difficulties in their very young lives that weren't spotted and weren't changed, and they've been set on the wrong trajectory for life. Some of the work that we're doing with families with young children have, as part of the evaluations, health economics studies as well, because what we want to be able to demonstrate, what's been demonstrated in many studies internationally, we want to demonstrate it here in Scotland, the failure to give children the care and to prevent maltreatment very young is very costly in terms of specialist education, in terms of therapeutic health interventions, and in terms of children's behavioural problems, and ultimately in terms of their consumption of all sorts of services, their failure to contribute economically, and so on. So in terms of a return right now, you know, we've got huge pressure on our education system and on our health system quite often as a result of children's difficulties that aren't tackled early on.
Does anybody disagree with that?
It depends what we mean by that early stage and what we're putting in. I hear nursery staff saying we can identify the child that's going to have difficulties when they're 11, 12, whatever. What do we do about that then? Sometimes nothing, or sometimes we put in extra childcare, sometimes we put in supports. What we don't put in is the coordinated assessment at that time. Yeah. And the frontline social work jobs, I would argue, is where that investment needs to be, because that's the people who are going to identify and coordinate those things. And some evidence from London, certainly anecdotal evidence from around Scotland, is when you have those fully staffed and operational frontline teams, the early intervention comes with them, because that's what they do.
Joe Finlay.
Specifically to Ruth and John, at a time of increasing pressures on local government, I wonder if you could describe the sort of changes on the work of your members, or maybe indeed the increased pressures that they're under as budgets get tighter.
I mean, there's such a varied position around Scotland in terms of how the front line of social work has been invested in. And in some areas, I think we said in our submission it would be good to have some research about thresholds across Scotland, about the level of services across Scotland, about whether there's a difference between authorities where there's been an inquiry and ones where there hasn't. Because an inquiry focuses the political mind, greatly in terms of those things. In my own authority in Edinburgh, there's been considerable investment in frontline practice team social work. That is now being bitten into. It leaves no leeway. People have tasted what it can be like, and now they're under the cosh again, and they find it even harder being under the cosh again because they've tasted what it can be like when you can do the job properly. And I think that's the kind of thing that they're experiencing around Scotland.
When you say they tasted what it was like to do it properly, were they at that point more able to do the therapeutic and rehabilitative work that they're trained to do? Absolutely. And now that is going out again.
It's under pressure again. And one of the trouble is that when people look at kind of outcomes and things like that, there's a view around at the moment across Scotland that if you do something about looked after children, you will stop the increase in looked after and accommodated children. You will stop them progressing along that road. The reality is that looked after children don't tend to progress along that road in the way that they think. And many children become looked after and accommodated without having been looked after in the first place. And this investment in the front line was meant to bring less pressure on the resources in terms of children coming into care. What it did in the first instance was bring more children into care and younger children into care because of what we were talking about before, that early intervention, spotting the problem, but dealing with it before the damage occurred. Now, I believe that that will level out in the future, but some of the spending plans that local authorities made was that if we increase the front line here, then we'll reduce the number of children who need to be in care. And that didn't happen, and it won't happen very often. There's some evidence from London about that evening out, and that the more money you put into that area, the more throughput you will get. But so the experience, it's not just the putting money in, it's not just the cutting money, it's the rationale with which you're allocating that money that's an issue.
I think the other bit that I've noticed is the variation in the amount of home visits that people are able to do as social workers. When you've got a social worker who is going to the home, is familiar with what's going on in the home, then the likelihood of that child coming into the care system reduces. When they feel under pressure and they don't have the time to do that kind of contact, that building up of the relationships, you find that the work is being contracted out to other people to do, and they become case managers and not social workers. And that's a real danger, because that's when children get escalated into the care system. So I think there are some real issues about how people are deployed at the front line, and I would support John's suggestion that there really does need to be an audit of what's happening at different parts of the country. Because the other bit that I think people need to take into account is what is a solution in Glasgow or Edinburgh is not necessarily a solution in the Western Isles, Orkney, Shetland or the Highlands. And you have to find different ways of dealing with difficult family situations with very, very different level of resources.
I mean, is there any of the panel disagree with the fact that, or the assertion that the job of social workers is getting much more difficult in the current climate? Does anybody disagree with that?
I think it's perhaps just important to think about the sort of other things around the edges that impact on it, that social workers are probably more mobile, that they stay less time, there's a higher turnaround. And therefore a sort of tradition where you would have some more experienced and senior staff who would be there as part of a team and able to kind of support and mentor members of the team so that kind of people's confidence grew. Those opportunities are no longer there. Sadly, the whole move towards mobile, agile working, where people don't actually themselves have a secure working base, place also mitigates against people actually coming and having a discussion with people about what's going on. And people are saying, do you know, you're talking about that, but actually that sounds a bit scary to me. Would you like me to go and do a visit with you? How about a two of us do that? So there's a bit of a sense that, but in an attempt to kind of become more streamlined, we've lost some of the relational stuff, which is not just important in terms of the families that you work with, but is important in terms of valuing the staff that who we're asking to do the complex job. I also, I can't speak authoritatively about it, but I do also query about how that is for colleagues, say, in health, because not dissenting in any way from the previous observations about early intervention, there is 9 months before children appear in this world, and there is time then to identify difficulties that are arising for the mum and starting to predict what some of those things might be. And whilst we are sitting here talking about what can be done about the children who are children now, we also have to do that thing about parallel stuff and think about the unborn children, and are people going to be available to respond to that? So, but yeah, absolutely endorse what they're saying, but also just think about the way that structurally we are mitigating against workers being able to do the job that they are sort of trained for, although training and developing their skills is another aspect.
I think one of the things that our members have commented on is in the cuts that have happened in the local government sector, training departments have disappeared. And actually that very post-qualification kind of training, which is so essential in this very complex area, is now disappearing. And that is actually a danger signal. And we really should be building something a bit more robust in terms of CPD and that kind of stuff.
Earlier on, several people mentioned this drift and delay and decision making. I'm just wondering whether within that we should move from a position where we have an optimistic approach to sort of parental capacity to change to one of a default position of pessimism, so we turn the whole thing on its head. Is that taking it a step too far, or is that where we should be going? If we're putting the child at the centre.
I think we should equip the professionals who are making these assessments with the tools that will make those assessments the right assessment. So I don't think there are tools out there. We can look at the interaction between a parent and child, and we can actually tell when it's not good enough, because we know about what a healthy relationship with between especially with very young children, what it looks like, and so yeah, as I said before, that we did a survey of frontline social workers, and they said they actually were aware of these things, but they didn't feel confident in making those assessments. So, and I know that the point's been made to the committee before that actually we don't need more research and more knowledge in these areas. There is knowledge out there. We just need to apply it, and you know that's the gap. And there's a whole lot of confusion around outside of the professional processes. For example, in the children's hearing room, where people see that there's an issue about balancing parents' point of view against the social workers rather than seeing the child. So the kind of knowledge and research flies out the window at that point. So I don't think it's a case of shifting the default so that there's pessimism. It's a case of shifting the default so that it's actually accurate, well-founded, evidenced. Staff, have skills and knowledge, confidence, well-supported, well-supervised, a model of supervision that actually lets you sit down and explore exactly what it is that you've seen in that family and test that out with somebody highly experienced who can help you formulate your judgment and make it something strong that a sheriff or a children's hearing is going to go with.
And then Ruth.
I don't dissent from anything that Matt's saying. The trick, the challenge is, where is the child while this is happening? Because what happens is that children are in one place while we're trying to reach a decision, and then they have to go to another place, perhaps because it's taking too long for the decision to be made, and that's not what people planned. And so children move repeatedly through the system, and every time that's a serious experience for the child. So the challenge is, can we create placements where it would be possible for children to stay and not have to move until it's absolutely clear that the next place they move to will be their keeping placement. So for younger children, you are looking at quite challenging practice, which is around identifying family-based resources which have the potential for taking children in an emergency, working with a reunification and rehabilitation programme, and yet at the same time saying, and if it doesn't work out, then the child could stay with us. That's hugely challenging, both in terms of the message it gives that somehow you're preempting the decisions and that you are operating with the rule of pessimism. But what the current system does is the current system causes huge distress and pain to children. The impact, the consequences of the drift and delay in our decision making are felt by the child. I think that's the most, there's no other message any of us would want to give today. It's that who bears the wounds of the drift and delay? It's the child. And therefore we have to think about ways of mitigating the wounds that they experience because of changes of placement. So it's about looking not just about particular schemes, but it's about looking at kind of creating, fostering resources that are flexible, so that they can withstand the drift and delay and the reversals, and to minimise the uncertainty that children will experience. So we will continue to have, because of all the things that colleagues have been saying about the need to test these things out in a robust way, we'll never be able to make quick and instant decisions. What we have to do is try and make sure that children experience a continuity of care.
I wanted to talk a bit about, I'm struggling with this word pessimistic, because as a social worker I think people can change, and that's one of my value bases. But what happens in the process is that you start work with parents and children, and you go on a journey together. You do an analysis of the situation and you go on a journey together to see if you can achieve that change. If you are working with those people, then they will understand all the way along the line what it is that you're trying to do. You get to a point where that change has not happened. And a good piece of practice is when the parent recognises that that is a decision that they may not be able to take themselves, but other people will be taking that decision that that child will not be going back to them. But it is a much less painless it's a journey, and it's how you do that journey it's that process that's really important. So it isn't about being pessimistic when you set out on the journey, it's about being optimistic when you set out on the journey. But if that journey is not a successful one, then you have to stop it and say, actually at this point we have to take some action, but you have got the evidence by then that should be robust enough for a children's hearing and a court in order to, if you have to go down that difficult line of taking the legal action.
Very brief question, if you don't mind.
Just using your analogy there, from what we've heard though, for some families the journey appears to be over before you've hit the next bus stop, but they stay on the bus for the whole journey until the bus in the end crashes over the cliff.
Yes, but I think it's about giving the professionals the time to do that. And if you're bogged down in meetings and you're bogged down doing the bureaucracy, the time, that reflective moment, those reflective times that you have to think about what you're doing in the supervision and all of that, then that's key to it. Yeah.
Mark, you wanted to come in, so you've been very patient, so on you go.
In terms of the system, I think we need to recognise and challenge drift and not be over optimistic about the possibility of reuniting a family. But I think the other part of that is not, that the counterpoint to that is not pessimism. The counterpoint to that is effective early years work, and not starting when the child is 3, but starting from birth or pre-birth in supporting all families with effective universal early years work, then having much stronger and more effective targeted early intervention that comes at an earlier stage to support families, but recognising when that early intervention isn't working, acting more decisively, and then when a decision is taken, thinking about the kind of planning drift that Barbara talked about, that once a child has been taken into care, they're in a foster placement, to some extent you move the focus moves on to the next child in crisis, and the child who is in a foster care placement doesn't get the attention they need, doesn't get the hand on the tiller that Barbara described, to make sure that just because they're safe now, you don't fail to focus the attention on finding permanency for that child. So it's about early years and very early years. It's about intervening early, but recognising when early intervention isn't working and then acting decisively and continuing that process through the child's life to a permanent solution. So I don't think there's a pessimism there. There's just having a system that integrates in the right way all along the line.
Liz Smith.
Mr Stevenson, you said in the answer to another question earlier that you had concerns about the undervaluing of social workers in comparison with other professionals like medics or teachers, and that you felt sometimes that a social worker had worked with that child for a very long period of time, and yet somebody else would come in and write a report over perhaps just 2 occasions. What do we have to do to address that?
I mean, I think there's 2 things. I think there's one about the general, and I don't know how we change this, I'm afraid, that, the general public view and the ability of the media to come charging down on social work in the way that they very rarely do with our professions. The other bit is about the confidence that's been spoken about, and about the time to actually put together good reports and assessments, because sometimes it's all there. It's just the way it's laid out or the evidence that's used. It doesn't come forward in the same form as other ones that are around do and aren't digestible as much, and it's something that some of my colleagues are doing some work on at the moment. So I think those are important issues. The other is that strangely, I think that, if you get a psychologist's report in court that talks about the child and the child's needs, it's very often paid attention to, and that's good. You get the same social work report doing it, and what's led in evidence is the practicalities. Did mum not visit 4 times? Have they not done? And we do get to positions still, tragically nowadays, where we have to send a child home to prove that it's failing, not because we think the child should go home. And less, I think. But I think it's on both sides. There's one about society in general, there's one about courts and all the rest. There's also about social workers having the time to do good reports and assessments.
Can I just ask you, is there any evidence that suggests in the local authorities where they have done probably further advanced in terms of joined up services, that the problem is less there, that people do understand that social workers have a very valuable role to play and that things are moving in the right direction?
I don't know of evidence.
No evidence anyway.
Yeah, I know that it changes local attitudes on the ground enormously when you're able to have systems where police, social work, health working together, and the misconceptions people have about each other's role are enormous. I mean, I still get phone calls from hospitals saying, can a social worker arrange a taxi for somebody to come to hospital? Can a social worker come and pick up? And that's not because it's because they just don't know what the role is. That a number of years ago, the Evening News in Edinburgh published that we had 2,000 children and family social workers. We had 197 at the time, and but most of my teaching colleagues were astonished that that's how many. So when you start getting the GIRFEC stuff working on the ground, and I know this firsthand, you break down some of those barriers and you start to understand each other, and I think that changes things. Yeah.
Could I just finish on the point that, I mean, one of the biggest dilemmas that this committee faces is the call for consistency in decision making, yet at the same time we're being told by several professionals on the ground that actually there isn't any need for consistency because every situation is different, and we're obviously trying to do the best in that. To what extent do we have to worry about the consistency of decision making across different local authorities and across Scotland?
And I think there is a need to understand and articulate in evidence consistency based on principle rather necessarily than on the nuts and bolts. And those principles about the rights of a child and a list of things that a child should have in their life, and ticking off those, and if they're not having those, then we need to have some consistency that we do something about that. But it's very difficult to do it in terms of families. You may have someone who's using drugs but has potential if you can do the other bits with them. You have someone who's using drugs who, whether they're using drugs or not, might not make very much difference between whether they could care for a child or not. So it's those issues about what our child's needs and what our child's rights and what do we as a country feel that we should provide those children. That's where we need the consistency.
Thank you very much.
Your point about consistency, I think, is one that's well made. I don't think there is enough consistency across local authorities. We deal with the vast bulk in Scotland and a lot in the northeast of England, and most of them are all different. It would be a situation whereby you would maybe a director or a head of service along with 2 or 3 key people who would potentially sit there and decide at the end of the day what would happen with a child and where they would go based upon a lot of research. It would be called a specific type of a committee. Then there would be another steering group and the authority next to it which operates in a different manner. And you have to kind of figure out who it is that you're talking to in these circumstances from our point of view. And I think that's a lack of consistency. I think if it was more clearly understood who specifically who was responsible for this and made these key decisions, that would help. Ruth talked earlier on about a system which vanished some years ago, whereby any referral to care situations would mean someone could sit there and look at the entire menu of options available to them. Something like that would be enormously useful. Mark?
I think in terms of the consistency question, there is best practice being developed in local authorities around the country. I think the consistency is ensuring that best practice is disseminated and the evidence assessed. And so I highlighted before the good work that we feel Barnardo's is doing with Fife in terms of the risk assessment framework. I think looking at the opportunity to have a national risk assessment framework which is based on evidence and best practice in local authorities with the guidance to support those kind of consistent tools will help to deliver better outcomes. So I think there are things that could be done more consistently that would take advantage of good work that's being done in different places in Scotland.
If you don't mind.
Just very briefly, I just would want to put in a plea for post-qualifying training, because it doesn't, yes, a whole range of frameworks and assessment tools, absolutely, but unless you actually understand what it is that you're trying to do when you're using those frameworks, there'll only ever be a tick box, and you have no credibility as a professional in any setting if you can't actually speak to the information you've provided.
In court, as a safeguarder, I do see social workers giving evidence. I can tell the ones who did the Dundee Child Protection course and those that didn't. And that just is an example of what we need to be investing in.
Thank you very much. Colin Beattie.
I have a couple of questions. Clearly the assessment of whether a child stays with its family or not requires a high level of skills and experience. The Care Inspectorate have indicated that only a third of assessments that are done are good enough, which implies that 2/3 are not. Given that low level of qualitative assessments, how do you tackle that? How do you deal with the training? And how can you possibly hope to have any good practice established across the country when you're dealing with that low level?
I think we've touched on a number of the important elements of what would answer that point through different questions, and we've talked about training, but I can just mention, go back again to post-qualifying training and then make an observation about the social work profession in particular. I think we do need to focus more on post-qualifying training, and post-qualifying training that is entirely about skills It's about applied skills. And post-qualifying training for social workers at the moment, the sorts of master courses that are around are actually quite often quite theoretical. And we don't need people to have richer theoretical frameworks without the skills to be able to apply them. So we certainly perceive a gap, and it's based on our experience in NSPCC. We're trying to test out some really sophisticated interventions that require a high level of skill. And what we're discovering is when we recruit social workers into those services, we're having to invest really heavily in additional skills-based training for them to be able to do that. And there's a contrast between what we have to do for some social workers and people, for example, who come from clinical psychology or psychiatry, who throughout their professional development post-qualifying will have been doing skills-based training. They will be used to testing out, doing their work with the family in a way that is filmed, and then another professional will actually look at and comment on their effectiveness in that particular intervention. They're used to that level of professional skill-based operation. And in social work, the minute you start to become a really good, experienced, effective social worker through experience, the next step for you is to become a manager. Now I have the privilege of working beside a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist who is nearing the end of his career. He's at the pinnacle of his profession, and every day he sees families still. You know, the most distinguished social workers tend to have last seen a family 25 years before because they've been a manager over the last 25 years. So there's something about we don't actually invest in and value the core of what a social worker can do, which is about helping families through relationships, through the application of skills. And there needs to be a refocusing on that element of what we can do for children and for families. So skills is about something that's the core, not an add-on. So I'd make that my main plea in response to what can be done.
It's one of the reasons I'm still a safeguarder. I still knock on people's doors. But I think it's not just that. I think it's also about the time for reflective practice. And one of the models you might want to look at is Northern Ireland, where they have consultant social workers who are paid at the same level as managers, who are there to promote that post-qualification skill development. And so they have a slightly different structure in the way that they organise their departments. And it's really worth going to have a look at how they've managed to extend the post-qualifying skill development.
I agree entirely with what's been said there, and there is no career structure in social work other than to not do social work anymore and manage it. But there's an issue about what is an assessment. And what is exactly meant by a third is not good enough, 2/3 are not good enough, or whatever. And we had a big debate on getting it right about a single shared assessment. And what it came down to in many local authorities, in many areas, was a single form that everybody could agree on, a single bit of paper that you could put it in, that gave an assessment that wasn't an assessment. It was a list of things that a child needed and had to be kept very simple, so that it didn't complicate matters like education and so on. And we need to really think what we're talking about when we're talking about a single shared assessment. And it's not a form, and so much of the debate has just created a form out of it.
I'll go on to my second question. I'm not sure I've got a full answer there, but I'll go on to my second question, which is, one thing I've been struck about is the sheer number of organisations that are involved and the number of people that are involved. Does this inhibit or indeed even prohibit the spread of good practice? And if you're going to bring in training, all the training I've heard is just for one piece here, one piece there. There's nothing across the board. Is it actually possible to have any sort of uniform approach given the number of organisations that you're dealing with?
I'd like to try to respond to your challenge there. We are one of the plethora of organisations, but we've been around for quite a long time. And one of the things that we aspire to do is, whilst we can offer training to single employer groups, as it were, that we believe and we aspire to an ethos of training across professional groups, that you do have a multidisciplinary approach. And that, I think, is something that increasingly people are realising the value of. One of however, I think one of the huge challenges that we face is thinking about how people who are not paid but whose responsibilities extend to children are able to enjoy the range of training and the knowledge that others have, and that's the children's hearing system. Because we've talked about that in terms of their decision making, but they're making decisions on the same children that we are working with and providing assessments on, and therefore the depth of understanding about some quite complex areas needs to be made available there. I think Tom this morning has talked about strategic commissioning of resources for children. I think that we local authorities, who are by far they are the main people responsible for the children. They have the legal responsibility, so we should probably see them as being, kind of there in terms of who has the responsibility for commissioning a range of training opportunities, and for thinking about how they can maximise that. And Ruth has talked about the fact that increasingly, with cuts in resources, training sections in local authorities have been decimated. And therefore, there is inevitably sometimes a rather piecemeal process of commissioning training from different providers, and not always the capacity to evaluate, well, has this actually helped us do what we need to be doing, and how can we kind of better review and better commission our training services. So I do think that there is no shortage of people with ideas, experience, expertise and knowledge who are out there sort of like available to help with the post-qualifying material, but actually ensuring that there is a coordinated approach, I think, is a challenge. I think you've hit on one of the kind of difficulties that exist.
John? I would just say you hear remarkable unanimity. There may be small points of difference between us, so there may be a plethora of organisations, but we all agree. And it shouldn't make it too difficult to create some of these. There's a role for Scottish Government to coordinate that, and it does in some instances too. But and there's a whole lot of things that goes on in different local authorities that is not shared. There's things going within local authorities not shared. One of the things I'm always banging the drum about. So some kind of coordination with that would be very welcome. Yeah.
Okay, Matt.
Very briefly, I think there's a plethora of organisations, but there's two things I would say. One is the knowledge that people need to be equipped with is about children's needs and development, about attachment, about healthy carer-child relationships. And about assessing that and about promoting that. That's the knowledge and skills that people need. I'd say out of the plethora of organisations, there's a pretty good place to start, which would be the universal service, health visiting service, for example, midwifery, which means all families. And there was a survey done by Scottish Attachment in Action of the current level of services that can demonstrate that they understand attachment, and the training and models are built on that. And they made the observation about health visiting that in the whole health visiting qualification process there's one lecture on child development. And I don't know if that's entirely fair, but there could be more focus on child development in that. And the second is for local authority frontline services. And if you did that and fed it through into strategic commissioning, you could take care of pretty much the sector, I think.
That's a bold claim, I should say, Matt, but we'll see. Matt Everett.
Just an observation from our members who commission from us CPD seminars. And what's impressed us over the last 6 months in particular, probably the last year, is the number of requests that we have had to run workshops on ethical decision making. And I think that's says something about the state that the practitioners find themselves in trying to make very difficult recommendations in assessments when there's a complex issue, say, of different family members' needs, different human rights issues for different family members. And again, I refer back to the Mental Welfare Commission report on parents who are detained. And it seems to me that, yes, there's an awful lot about training and assessment and all the rest of it, but there's also something else there, which is about how do we, as the people who are charged by society to make these recommendations to courts and to children's hearings, how do we come to those complex ethical recommendations that we have to make? And so I wouldn't say it's just about assessment of the children, it's just about that. It's about trying to see that there is that other level that we also have to, on heart and soul, be saying to the court, this is the best recommendation for this child.
Thank you. George Adam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. One of the things that we've already touched on this slightly, but one of the things that keeps coming up, the ADSW mentioned, is keeping experienced social workers in the front line. Seems to be a problem. Is it because, as Matt says, we're promoting them all, which goes against things that happen in most industries, because normally if you're very good at the front line, you don't get promotion. But is it because we're doing that, or is it because there are some of the things we've got mentioned was that social workers seem to want to go and do some more positive work elsewhere? Is it the pressure of the job? Do they feel they can do more positive work, do more therapeutic stuff? Or are there any practical ideas that any of you have that could make this difference? Or is it down to the fact that when we do promote these people, they become part of the problem and maybe putting the pressure on to the people in the front line? There's quite a broad spectrum of questions there, but
we've been doing some work with ADSW on middle managers and first-line managers, and I think one of the issues for them is that they get caught in the middle, trying to support their frontline staff, doing ethical practice, but also with trying to implement the budget cuts or whatever it is that's going on. What really surprised us about this group was that when we said, what is the most positive thing that you've done, we found that they were quietly developing neighbourhood services. And there's a real role in there for the frontline practitioner moving on into that middle management slot to actually see that there are some wider issues in their neighbourhoods that they could tackle. But it was kind of getting dealt with as a sideline because they were so busy managing this kind of trying to bring together the frontline and the senior management. So I think people go for those middle management jobs because they want to do something a bit more than just the front line. But then when they get there, they discover that it's actually a very difficult place to be. So we're doing some work on that, but I think the other problem that it highlights is there isn't a proper career structure within social work. Once you've got to the top of your main grade posting, if you want to stay in practice, that's where you stay for the next 40 years. It's not much of a prospect.
The other place you can go, if you're a frontline social worker in children family teams, the other place you can go is other social work posts in other care groups. And people do that. Yeah. And, I know from experience, people will say, well, I've done my time, because there's a perception that actually, you can only sustain that so long because of the pressure. So people see other care groups as being less demanding. And people, so there's a sort of squeezing. There's some push factors that mean that it's hard to kind of build a career and build a profile and have that valued in the system and stay there. It's by exception that you'll get somebody that's in one team in one area for 20 years these days. So I think there's something about valuing the frontline process, reflecting it in our professional development processes, so there really is a tangible and evidenced gathering of skill and expertise that would become quite clear that you have to recognise that and give it status. In health professions, there's a separation between professional governance and other forms of management. So, you know, you don't sort of spend a bit of time being a psychiatrist, then become a sort of senior psychiatrist that doesn't see families anymore. But you are managed, and you know there's a management system around about it. So maybe there's ways we can sort of value the front line more. And just we've touched on reflective practice and the need for supervision. We're talking about families where relationships are under pressure because of families' needs. The people who support those families, it's all about their ability to understand relationships and make relationships. And how do you make people effective? You have to support them really well for them to be able to do that. And there's something about how we centre our, you know, where's our investment going to go? It should be into the frontline practice, and it should, the valuing of it should reflect that.
Say that I'm a children's practice team manager, and I'm not any sure whether that's now a success or not, given there is a huge issue. We used to have a number of years ago casework consultants, people like that. There's a huge issue about the profession and recognising interpersonal skills, direct work with children and families. And, you know, it used to be that, you know, 4 years into the job, you stopped doing that anymore because you would be looking for a senior social work job or whatever. There are structures in many authorities for senior practitioners that takes them a bit beyond, but it doesn't recognise and it doesn't give to people the skills that many of the managers, I'm managing people and supervising people and going through reflective discussions and support with them on many issues that their training is far more up to date than mine is. And it's a huge gap that we need to, as we talked, you know, there is a need for the strategic management, there's a need for leadership training which is in place to have effective management at the local level, but there's also a need for that professional support that is recognised as a skill and that you can carry on doing.
We're slightly over time, but a very brief question from Neil Finlay.
Speaking about that, I can see the analogy with teaching, because the same issues applied there, that good teachers ended up sitting in offices, and then they introduced chartered teacher, which was going to deal with that, which has now been scrapped. And I just see the analogy there. It's more a comment than a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I express the committee's thanks to all the witnesses who have come along this morning. As I said at the beginning, this is our last main oral evidence session before our event in June, and then the Minister at the end of June. So can I thank you very much for coming along this morning and helping us with our inquiry, and can I suspend briefly? We now move to agenda item 3 to continue consideration of the post-16 Education in Scotland Bill at stage 2. We will consider all remaining amendments today. Can I welcome Mike Russell, the Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning, and his accompanying officials to the committee this morning, and can also welcome Marco Biaggi, who has joined us again this morning. Everyone should have with them a copy of the bill, the third marshalled list of the amendments, and the third groupings of amendments. And pick up where we left off last week and begin at section 8, designation of colleges. Can I call amendment 169 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with amendments 170 and 171. Cabinet Secretary to move amendment 169 and speak to amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Amendments 169 and 170 relate to the role of regional strategic bodies in proposing or approving colleges being assigned to them which have not previously been listed as a fundable body in Schedule 2 of the 2005 Act, or have not already been assigned to a regional strategic body. As it stands in the bill, a regional strategic body could only propose to ministers that a college be assigned to it after it has assessed whether the college meets the fundable body criteria specified in Section 7.2 of the 2005 Act. On reflection, and having of course listened to the views of stakeholders at stage 1, we think there is merit in transferring these functions from regional strategic bodies to the Funding Council. This would ensure that a consistent approach is taken nationally in assessing whether colleges meet the fundable body criteria. It would be more efficient, relieving pressure on regional strategic bodies to resource themselves to fulfil this function. For these reasons, I would invite the committee to support amendments 169 and 170. Amendment 171 is linked to giving the Scottish Funding Council the role I've just outlined, and to a related amendment I'll propose in a later group regarding the SFC's role in informing ministers if assigned colleges no longer meet the fundable body criteria. Given these responsibilities, I think there's a value in terms of good governance in giving the SFC a complementary duty to review whether assigned colleges continue to meet the fundable body criteria, and Amendment 171 achieves this. It would, of course, be for the Funding Council to determine when it is appropriate to conduct such a review. After carrying out any review, the Funding Council will be required to report to ministers, setting out its conclusions and making any recommendations, and that is why I would invite the committee to support Amendment 171.
Thank you. Can I call Liam MacArthur?
Convener, just to clarify 169, 170, I'm perfectly content with. In terms of 171, on the face of it, I can't see anything here that wouldn't already be done as a matter of course. It'd be interesting perhaps for the Cabinet Secretary to set out what deficiency exists in terms of the current powers available to the Funding Council to make this necessary, and what circumstances does he envisage such powers being used that differ from what happens at present, and in light perhaps of comments I made last week in terms of the structure within the Highlands and Islands, I just wonder whether there's something in the possible future structure of UHI that may be at root here, but either way I'd certainly welcome a bit of additional clarification.
Thank you. Liz Smith.
Yes, thank you, Convener. I'm very happy with amendments 169 and 170. Just, Cabinet Secretary, I think it would be helpful in the aspect of 171, just if you could assure us that some of the concerns that were raised by the colleges within UHI, that this amendment addresses some of these concerns. That would be very helpful.
Thank you. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary to wind up?
Yes, Convener, in terms of the powers that this would give, which don't exist at the present moment, I tell Mr MacArthur that there wouldn't be powers over assigned colleges unless this amendment were passed. So that is a difference, and that's why it's required. In terms of UHI, I recognise the two members' position. I have had, I think it's fair to say, over the weekend, further representations from Highland and Island MSPs arising out of a meeting held, I think, in the Northern College, as a result of which, North Highland College, as a result of which I have copied to the members that correspondence. I'm happy to meet with them and with those other Highland members to ensure that we take this forward. I think there is a solution that is possible, and I've spoken to James Fraser, but I would want to discuss with the members in detail before coming back at stage 3. So that offer remains open, and I think they have had an email from me yesterday which confirms that. I hope they have anyway. Good.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 169 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. Can I call Amendment 170 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 169, Cabinet Secretary to move formally?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 170 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 85 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 72, Cabinet Secretary to move formally?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 85 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
No.
We are not all agreed. Therefore, can I ask those who are in favour of Amendment 85 to please show? Those against? No abstentions. The result of the vote on Amendment number 85, 8 votes for and 1 vote against. Amendment 85 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 86 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 72? Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 86 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 171 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 169? Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 171 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that Section 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Can I call Amendment 137 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 136? Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 137 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not. Would all those who are in favour of Amendment 137 please vote now? All those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 137, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 137 was disagreed to. The question is that Section 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 43 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with Amendment 136? Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
On the basis of the debate, I'll not move.
Thank you. The question is that... we don't have to ask that. Can I call Amendment 138 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendment 139? Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 138 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Convener, new Section 23E of the 2005 Act requires a regional strategic body to monitor the performance of the colleges assigned to it. The section also provides that such performance monitoring may include assessing the quality of fundable further and higher education. However, Section 13 of the 2005 Act also imposes a duty on the Funding Council to secure that provision is made for assessing the quality of fundable further and higher education provided by post-16 education bodies. As the explanatory notes which accompany the bill highlight, the SFC currently relies on the services of Education Scotland to review colleges. Our intention is that the activities of the Funding Council and regional strategic bodies should be complementary with regard to performance monitoring. So because there are some concerns that the bill creates scope for duplication, I'm proposing Amendment 139 to prevent this. The amendment achieves this by requiring regional strategic bodies to have regard to the desirability of preventing any unnecessary duplication with the actions of ministers or the SFC in relation to the performance of assigned colleges. Amendment 138 builds on this by adding the word monitoring into Section 23E2A. This makes clear that in monitoring the performance of its colleges, the regional strategic body does not have to arrange its own assessment of the quality of education provided by its colleges, but can instead rely on assessments carried out by the SFC in the exercise of its duties under Section 13 of the 2005 Act. I hope it's clear that the amendments will be helpful in clarifying the role of regional strategic bodies in relation to performance monitoring, and I ask the committee to support them on that basis.
Thank you. Can I call Neil Findlay?
Yeah, in relation to 138, we have concerns about that. It seems to extend the role of regional strategic bodies to an assessment and monitoring function of HE and FE in assigned colleges. We believe that the regional strategic body's role is to work with and support assigned colleges rather than provide an assessment and monitoring role. We question how this would work in practice and how the relationship with the SFC would operate.
Thank you. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary to wind up?
Yes, I think that what Amendment 138 does is in actual fact almost the opposite of what Mr Findlay claims. It means that the regional strategic body doesn't have to undertake its own assessment. Monitoring is already in existence. It doesn't have to do this, but it can rely on assessments carried out by the SFC, which of course relies on Education Scotland to do them. So in actual fact, rather than increasing the monitoring assessment, it actually reduces the monitoring assessment, because it actually means that it wouldn't have to undertake this task and it could rely on the SFC and Education Scotland. And I think that is a helpful thing to do rather than an unhelpful thing to do.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The question is that Amendment 138 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not all agreed. Can those who wish to support Amendment 138 please show? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment 138, 7 votes in favour, 2 votes against. Amendment 138 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 139 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 138, Cabinet Secretary to move formally?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 139 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. Can I call Amendment 172 in the name of Neil Bibby, grouped with Amendments 173, 174 and 180? Neil Bibby to move Amendment 172 and speak to amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. The reasons for Amendment 172, 173, 174 and 180 is to ensure that colleges support economic regeneration and social inclusion and cohesion in their area. These are similar to the amendments I moved last week to regional colleges. 172 and 173 focus on economic and social regeneration in the localities of colleges. As I said last week, at a time of such high youth unemployment, it's vital that colleges play a key role in supporting young people into work. Colleges also play an important role in supporting older learners who want to retrain for employment and give people second chances in life, as we discussed before, and they support economic and social regeneration in our communities. As I also said last week, Scotland's economic needs in terms of colleges are important, but what is missing from the bill is a specific regional focus. Different regions face different challenges and have different needs and priorities. A regional focus allows for a tailored approach to the different challenges that each area face. There has been a focus on widening access to higher education, but we need to ensure that social inclusion is also promoted in further education. That is what Amendment 174 and 174 and 180 are about. Learners might face challenging circumstances, so we need to ensure that colleges do all they can and continue the good work that they already do to encourage people from disadvantaged backgrounds to take advantage of the opportunities in training and retraining that are available at their colleges. Regard to local and regional economic issues are important. I believe they were important last week in discussing regional colleges' responsibilities. They are as important, if not more important, in the context of regional strategic bodies' responsibilities. The widening access agenda should also be a priority in our colleges and should promote social inclusion and cohesion in the communities that those colleges serve. We should also take into account the access for groups that are protected under the Equality Act.
Thank you very much. Call Joan McAlpine.
Convener. Yes, I think in principle most of us would have a great deal of sympathy with what the members just said. However, I'm not sure that these amendments are a way to get towards the aims that I think we're all in agreement with. And I'd be interested to see what the Cabinet Secretary said in response to that.
Thank you very much. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary?
Thank you. Neil Bibby's amendments 172, 173 and 174 are similar to those we discussed last week when we covered the functions of regional colleges. These amendments do helpfully stress the important role of regional bodies in economic and social regeneration, reducing social exclusion in areas where its colleges are situated, and I'm sympathetic to them. But members will recall when we debated these issues for regional colleges, I made clear that whilst I recognise and accept the points being made, and I'm more than willing to consider an amendment of Stage 3 to seek to capture the spirit of the amendments proposed by Neil Bibby, I couldn't agree to these amendments themselves. And I asked Neil Bibby to withdraw the amendments and work with us. And the same is true of Amendment 180. I agree with the principle underlying the amendment. I'm entirely happy with the concept that the college sector, as well as the university sector and schools, should be engaged in efforts to widen access, and regional strategic bodies will have an important role to play. But there are technical difficulties with the amendment. It lacks specificity. It doesn't make clear who it has a duty to identify those who are socially excluded. And the term socially excluded itself presents difficulties since it's inconsistent with the terminology used elsewhere in the bill, and it's not made clear what the exact meaning of the term is. Neither does the amendment, and this is quite crucial, Convener, make reference to underrepresentation, which is of course the core problem which all widening access efforts are intended to address. Committee members will recall that in the first session, in response to Marco Biagi's Amendment 60, I made a commitment to develop a Stage 3 amendment which would establish widening access to further or higher education as one of the key matters the Funding Council must have regard to in the exercise of its functions. I believe that would satisfy the overall aim of Mr Bibby's amendment, whilst avoiding the difficulties I've highlighted. Therefore, I would ask Mr Bibby to withdraw Amendment 180 and also to withdraw the other amendments and to work with the Government in making sure that we get the right amendment amendments that carry the spirit of what he's trying to achieve.
Thank you. Neil Willie, to wind up and to inform us whether he wishes to press or withdraw his amendment.
Thanks, Convener. I don't have much to add from what I said earlier. I'm content with the wording of the amendments and where they're placed in the bill, and I intend to press the amendments.
The question is that Amendment 172 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not. Those who wish to support Amendment 172, please show. Okay. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment 172, 4 votes for and 5 votes against. Amendment 172 was disagreed to. I call Amendment 173 in the name of Neil Bibby. Already debated with Amendment 172. Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 173 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not. Could those members who wish to support Amendment 173 please vote now? Okay. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 173, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 173 was disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 174 in the name of Neil Bibby? Already debated with Amendment 172. Neil Bibby, to move or not move? The question is that Amendment 174 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not. With those members who wish to support Amendment 174, please vote now. Those against? Result of the vote on Amendment 174, 4 votes in favour and 5 against. Amendment 174 was disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 140 in the name of Liz Smith? Already debated with Amendment 72. Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 140 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not. Those who wish to vote in favour of Amendment 140, please show. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 140, 2 votes in favour, 5 votes against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 140 was disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 175 in the name of Neil Bibby? Already debated with Amendment 72. Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 175 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not. Can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 175 to please vote? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 175, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 175 was disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 176 in the name of Neil Bibby? Already debated with Amendment 72. Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 176 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not. Can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 176 to please vote now? All those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 176, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 176 was disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 177 in the name of Neil Bibby? Already debated with Amendment 72. Neil Bibby, to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 177 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not. Can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 177 to please show now? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment 177, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 177 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 87 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary? Already debated with Amendment 72. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Move.
The question is that Amendment 87 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Can I call Amendment 88 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary? Already debated with Amendment 74. Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Yes. Move. Sorry. Yes, move.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. The question is that Amendment 88 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 178 in the name of George Adam, already debated with Amendment 72? George Adam, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 178 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 179 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 72. Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 179 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not. Therefore, can all those who wish to support Amendment 179 please vote now? All those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 179, there was 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 179 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 89 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 72, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally?
Move.
The question is that amendment 89 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. Can I call amendment 90 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 74, Cabinet Secretary, to move formally?
Move.
The question is that amendment 90 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call amendment 180 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with amendment 172, Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that amendment 180 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not all agreed. Can I ask those members who wish to support amendment 180 to please vote now? Those against? The result of the vote on amendment number 180, total votes in favour 4, total votes against 5. Amendment 180 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 141 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with amendment 72, Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 141 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can I ask those members who wish to support amendment 141 to vote now? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on amendment number 141, 2 votes in favour, 5 against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 141 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 44 in the name of Liz Smith, grouped with amendments 45, 46, 142, 47, 48, 144, 49, 50, 51, 52, 145 and 53. Liz Smith to move amendment 44 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Convener, thank you. Can I move amendment 44? I think a section of the bill that's created some confusion is that around the lines of responsibility and accountability. In several key passages of the bill, there's an implication that a regional strategic body, not UHI, would require assigned colleges to move staff or assets as it saw fit. This raised some issues, particularly in terms of one body seen to have control over staff contracts and the movement of assets, yet the lines of accountability being seen to lie elsewhere. The amendments in my name in this group, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52 and 53, are aimed at ensuring that there is clarity on this issue and also achieving agreement between the institutions rather than by any arrangement that is imposed and which raises questions of accountability or conflict of interest. I'm also content with the amendments 142, 144 and 145 in the name of Neil Findlay. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I call Neil Findlay to speak to amendment 142 and other amendments in the group?
Thanks, Convener. 142 removes the ability to transfer staff between regions, as we believe the distances involved is likely to mean that these transfers are problematic and fall outside of reasonable commute distances. There is established employment law in this, so while they might have the right to put this clause in the bill, it will be difficult to apply in practice. Therefore, we think a straight deletion is best. 144 consequent on amendment 142, there's no need to consult other regional strategic bodies if no power is there to transfer is transferred to other regional strategic bodies. And in 145 there's we would refer to TUPE, and there's similar practice to what was included in the Water Industry Scotland Act 2002 in relation to transfer of staff. We think that the ability to transfer staff by regional board is very widely drafted, and we want a reminder on the face of the bill that employment law and contractual rights do exist. After all, the regional board is not the employer.
Thank you very much. Can I call George Adam?
Yes, once again, Convener, I can see what the amendments here are trying to do, but I don't think they actually they don't achieve that as they stand at the moment. I think throughout the whole process there needs to be negotiations and discussions through all the with all the bodies and groups involved, and there needs to be someone who makes a decision at the end of the day. So I would say it's something I have some sympathy with, but maybe some way we could work something better for the future.
Okay, can I call the Cabinet Secretary?
Yes, I broadly agree with George Adam. I think that the intention behind these amendments is a good intention. I don't think that they necessarily achieve the results that they want to achieve, and I'll explain that in just a moment, in particular reference to one of them. And essentially I'm saying again that I think it would be best if these were withdrawn and that there was constructive discussion between now and stage 3 so we could get the amendments that work. It's a point I keep making, and I'm happy to have that constructive discussion, as I've been saying throughout this process. The basic policy attention, Convener, behind the staff transfer provisions in the bill is twofold. It assists in the sharing of services, assures that in multi-college regions the regional strategic body has the power to give effect to its duty to plan for delivering coherent provision in the region. The judgment to be made in multi-college regions is in balancing the autonomy of the institutions with the ability of a regional body to pursue its regional plans. Amendments 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 50, 52 don't achieve this balance because they remove all references to the new section 23L to the terms require or requirement and replace them with the term request. The effect of Amendments 49, 51 and 53 would be to require every transfer under section 23L to be binding only with the consent of the colleges. Now, the bill does make such a provision for UHI because of UHI's unique geography, and it would be inappropriate for such transfers to be decided without consent. But I'm not completely persuaded that the consent in every case strikes the right balance. But I'm happy to carefully consider the issues again, and I'm happy to return with amendments at stage 3, because I think there is a balance to be struck, and it may well be that the balance lies between these two positions. Turning to amendments 142 and 143, there are cases in which transfer to a regional college or a regional strategic body might be appropriate in supporting the delivery of shared services across two regions. It could, for example, be something that Glasgow and Lanarkshire regional boards might want to consider given their close proximity. But I'm willing to reflect again on what the sort of transfer, whether it needs to be on the face of the bill, and I'll do so in the context of my consideration of the round of provisions relating to transfer in staff and property ahead of stage 3. And I have a lot of sympathy for Amendment 145. I do want TUPE to apply to transfers made under Section 23L. I'm content to reflect further on whether a provision like this should be made in the bill. And I'm again happy to enter into discussions on that in the lead up to Stage 3. Now, my offer, therefore, Convener, is to look at those with the members involved and to have discussion to try and find a way forward if the members wish to withdraw their amendments at this stage, so we can come back with something that actually works.
Thank you very much. Cabinet Secretary, can I call Liz Smith to wind up and indicate whether she wishes to press or withdraw her amendment?
Thank you, Convener. I hear what the Cabinet Secretary says. I think my biggest concern, that particularly when it reflects to a lot of the rationalisation of colleges and the new structure that they're under, is that we would have an agreement between the relevant institutions rather than any hint that anything might be imposed. And that's the basis for me bringing forward these amendments. So I would like to press Amendment 44, which you'll ask me to do in a minute.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not. Can those members who wish to support Amendment 44 please vote now? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 44, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 44 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 45 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44, Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 45 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not all agreed. Can I ask that members who wish to support Amendment 45 please vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 45, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 45 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 46 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44, Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, can members who wish to support Amendment 46 please vote now? Thank you. Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 46, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 46 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 142 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with Amendment 44? Neil Findlay, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 142 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 142 to please vote now? Thank you. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 142, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 142 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 47 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Will those members who wish to support Amendment 47 please show? Thank you. All those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 47, 4 votes for, 5 against. Amendment 47 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 48 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 48 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not all agreed. Those members who wish to support Amendment 48, please show. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. Amendment number 48, the results of that vote, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 48 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 143 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 72? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 143 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Can members who wish to support Amendment 143 please vote now? Thank you. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment number 143, there were 2 votes in favour, 5 against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 143 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 144 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with Amendment 44? Neil Findlay, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 144 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are not all agreed. Can those members who wish to support Amendment 144 please vote now? I think I'll start that again. There was several hands going up and down at the same time there. Those members who wish to support Amendment 144 please show. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 144, there were 4 votes for, 5 against. Amendment 144 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 49 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move? The question is that Amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 49 please vote now? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment 49, 4 votes for, 5 votes against. Amendment 49 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 50 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, can those who wish to support Amendment 50 please show? Okay. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 50. There were 4 votes for, 5 votes against, and therefore Amendment 50 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 51 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Therefore, can members who wish to support Amendment 51 please show? Thank you. Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment 51, there were 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 51 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 52 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can those members who wish to support Amendment 52 please vote? Okay, thank you. Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 52, there were 4 votes for, 5 against. Amendment 52 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 145 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with amendment 44? Neil Findlay, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that amendment 145 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Those in favour of amendment 45, those in favour of amendment 145, please show. Thank you. Those against? Result of the vote on amendment number 145, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 145 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 53 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with amendment 44? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 53 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can those members who wish to support amendment 53 please vote now? Okay, thank you. Those against? The result of the vote on amendment number 53, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 53 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 91 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 165? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 91 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that section 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. Can I call amendment 92 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 92 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Can I call amendment 93 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Move.
The question is that amendment 93 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call amendment 146 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with amendment 77? Neil Findlay, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that amendment 146 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Will those members who wish to support amendment 146 please vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 146, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 146 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 147 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with amendment 77? Neil Findlay, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that amendment 147 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can I ask those members who wish to support amendment 147 to please vote now? Okay. Those against? Result of the vote on amendment number 147. 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 147 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 71 in the name of Colin Beattie, already debated with amendment 77? Colin Beattie, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Are members content not to move that? Okay, can I move on then? The question, I've done that one. Can I call amendment 94 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 94 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Call amendment 181 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with amendment 77. Neil Bibby, to move.
Move.
The question is that amendment 181 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Would those members who wish to support amendment 181 please vote now? Thank you. Those against? The result of the vote on amendment number 181, 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 181 is disagreed to. Can I call amendment 95 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 95 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. I call amendment 96 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that amendment 96 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not all agreed. Therefore, would those members who wish to support amendment 96 please vote now? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on amendment number 96, there were 7 votes for, 1 vote against and 1 abstention. Amendment 96 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 54 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 54 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed. Therefore, can those who wish to support Amendment 54 please show? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 54 was there were 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 54 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 97 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 72? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally. Move. The question is that Amendment 97 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 148 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with Amendment 72? Neil Findlay, to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 148 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Therefore, can members who wish to support Amendment 148 please show? Thank you. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 148, 4 votes in favour, 5 against. Amendment 148 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 182 in the name of Marco Biaggi, already debated with Amendment 72? Marco Biaggi, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 182 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed. Those members who wish to support Amendment 182 please show. Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 182, 7 votes for, 2 votes against. Amendment 182 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 55 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77? Liz Smith, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 55 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Those members who wish to support Amendment 55 please indicate. Those against? Amendment number 55, the result of the vote is total votes for 4, against 5. Amendment 55 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendments 98, 99, 100, 101 and 102, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated? Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 98 to 102 en bloc?
Moved en bloc.
Can I ask whether any member objects to a single question being put on Amendments 98 to 102? Therefore, if no member objects, the question is that Amendments 98 to 102 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Moving on to the next grouping, employee terms and conditions. Can I call Amendment 149 in the name of Neil Findlay, grouped with Amendments 183, 153, 193, 194, 154 and 195. I have to point out that if Amendment 193 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 194 and 195 because of preemption. Can I call Neil Findlay to move Amendment 149 and speak to other amendments in the group?
149, 153 and 154. The Cabinet Secretary has for some time spoken of his desire to reinstate national pay bargaining, and as did Professor Griggs in his report and evidence to the committee, I believe he said that as well. So these amendments seek to take us along that route, and if we are to be convinced that the Cabinet Secretary and the Government wants to move towards national pay bargaining, then I would certainly hope that they would agree to these 3 amendments.
Thank you very much. Can I call Neil Bibby to speak to Amendment 183 and other amendments in the group?
Thanks, Convener. I'll speak only about my Amendment 183, but I also support Amendments 149, 153 and 154 in the name of Neil Findlay. I believe it's unnecessary and overly bureaucratic to create a new pension scheme. I believe the existing schemes should continue to be accessed. We know resources are tight and college staff are under a great deal of pressure at the moment. Setting up a new pension scheme would take a considerable volume of work and a significant amount of time, which would be better spent focusing on the needs of college staff and students in our communities. It is possible to become an admitted member of existing schemes, and I understand the police service recently joined, I believe, Strathclyde Pension Fund, so I would ask why can colleges not just do the same and join existing schemes as they do currently?
Thank you. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary to speak to Amendment 193 and other amendments in the group? Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. I think Amendment 193 is particularly crucial. The role of the principal is pivotal. That's as much the case in the context of assigned colleges as elsewhere. In multi-college regions, principals will have a particularly key role in establishing a productive working relationship with their regional strategic body, which will be responsible for strategic planning in the region. I'm therefore pleased that College of Scotland has acknowledged the role that regional strategic bodies ought to play in the appointment of principals of assigned colleges, and that's why I'm happy now to bring forward Amendment 193 to reposition the role of regional strategic bodies to approve rather than make the appointment of the principal and the associated terms and conditions. I know this was much sought at stage one and I think will be welcomed by the sector. Amendment 194, however, is unnecessary. It makes provision for a regional college board to appoint a person as principal on such terms and conditions as it thinks fit. That's already the effect of existing paragraph 16 of Schedule 2 to the 1992 Act. And Amendment 195 removes new paragraph 17(1)(a) of Schedule 2 to the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 1992. I agreed that that should be done. That's why Amendment 193 does it. So it is actually redundant in those contexts. Unlike Amendment 193, Amendment 195, however, does not recognise the appropriate role of the regional strategic body that will play in the appointment of the principal, and that is now recognised by College of Scotland. And I therefore invite the committee to support Amendment 193 and invite Mr MacArthur to withdraw his amendments because the issue is dealt with in 193. Amendment 183 removes the ability of a regional board to establish a new pension scheme. There's a difference, I would argue, with Mr Bibby, between encouraging access to existing pension schemes, which I would do, and actually removing the ability of the regional board to have any say in this matter at all, and to establish a new pension scheme should it wish to do so. This would actually prevent them from establishing a pension scheme on better terms and conditions. So I do think that this is an amendment as drafted, which would not achieve the amendment, and indeed would be a retrograde amendment. Now, I want to confirm with Mr Finlay, as I've done many times, that I'm absolutely committed to the system of national bargaining, national terms and conditions for colleges. I intend that to go into place, unlike perhaps my predecessors in the administrations up to 2007. But there is already a framework for negotiation now established, and the regional leads have established that with the relevant trade unions, and that process is ongoing. And having therefore considered the matter, I don't think Mr Finlay's amendments actually give effect to national pay bargaining. That is actually what is happening in the framework for negotiation. If there is a need to put this on the face of the bill, then I'm willing to consider that with Mr Finlay in terms of the words that will be used. But these amendments don't do it. The framework that is being discussed does do it. That framework is now in... No, can I finish, please? That is in place, and I think, therefore, to allow negotiation to take place would be the best thing. I'm happy to take Mr Finlay's intervention now.
Could the Cabinet Secretary give some indication as when he thinks that the proper framework will bear fruit and that we will see national pay bargaining?
That's in the hands of those who are negotiating the matter, and I think that's the proper thing to happen. The trade unions are engaged, the trade unions have established this framework, and that framework will produce the results. And I'm very keen that that moves forward. It's a complex and difficult matter, but there's a commitment to it. I've said it on many occasions, I'll repeat it here again now, and if Mr Finlay wants to see this in the face of the bill, I'm happy to work with him to find a way in which we could put a reference to national pay bargaining. But these three amendments won't achieve it, and they won't in actual fact help the matter. So I would encourage him not to press these amendments, to work with us to make sure this happens.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I call Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 194 and other amendments in the group?
Thank you, Convener. The Cabinet Secretary, I think, set the background to the amendments 194 and 195 in my name, which seek to address the potential conflict whereby the terms and conditions for the principal of an assigned college would be set by the regional board, while he or she would be an employee of the assigned college and line managed accordingly. It would also avoid setting the strange precedent of an employee of one legal entity having their terms and conditions set by another legal entity. As a result, the board of an assigned college would be required to accept these terms and conditions, which may be different from those otherwise used in the college. Obviously, this is a potential problem. The Cabinet Secretary has recognised his Amendment 193 appears to do much the same thing as my two amendments. Its principal shortcomings, perhaps, that it preempts both of mine, but I think on this occasion I'm prepared to commit Harry Curry and vote for his amendment and see mine being preempted. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr MacArthur. As no other members have indicated they wish to speak, can I call Neil Finlay to wind up and to indicate whether he wishes to press or withdraw his amendment.
Just press the amendment.
The question is that Amendment 149 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed, therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 149 please indicate. Okay, those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 149, 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 149 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 183 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 149. Neil Bibby to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 183 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed, therefore can those members who wish to support Amendment 183 please show? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 183, 3 votes in favour, 5 votes against and 1 abstention. Amendment 183 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 184 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 77. Neil Bibby to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 184 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not all agreed. Therefore, can members who wish to support Amendment 184 please vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 184 was 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 184 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 185 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 77. Neil Bibby to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 185 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 185 please vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 185, 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 185 is disagreed to. Moving on to the next group, Regional Boards General Powers. Can I call Amendment 186 in the name of Neil Bibby, grouped with Amendments 187 and 188. Neil Bibby to move Amendment 186 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Thanks, Convener. I'd like to move 186 and speak to the other amendments, including 188, which is in my name. The reason behind Amendment 186 is so that colleges are not exposed to the potential consequences of indemnifying third parties. Understand that the 1992 legislation states that no form of indemnification can be given without Scottish Funding Council permission. In the bill at present states property. I would suggest that we be opposed to any form of indemnification since it grants potentially unlimited guarantees to third parties which could potentially make colleges insolvent. If the granting of general contractual indemnification is to stay, it should be with the formal agreement of the Scottish Funding Council. Amendment 188 runs on from 186. It seeks to ensure that the boards acquire adequate insurance cover. The acquisition of adequate insurance cover should enable colleges to negotiate indemnification clauses out of most contracts they are offered to sign. Hence that proposed amendment. 187 in the name of Colin Beattie would give general powers to form companies. Colleges do have commercial activities, so I understand this is coming from, but allow Colin Beattie to speak to it in more detail.
Thank you very much. Can I call Colin Beattie to speak to Amendment 187 and the other amendments in the group?
Thank you, Mayor. Amendment 187 is quite a minor amendment, in fact. Incorporated colleges already have the power to form and promote companies. This amendment will clarify that a regional board's general power includes the ability to form and promote companies, and this power could, for example, be used to support delivery of shared services in their regions. It's really just a clarification.
Thank you. Does Liz Smith, do you wish to? Yeah, call Liz Smith.
Thank you, Convener. I think there's a question as to why Amendment 186 is necessary, given that I can't see any reason to underpin that with legislation. And for 188, I would welcome some clarification as to the impact, since it appears to limit the board's ability to guarantee or give indemnity. On 187, which gives regional boards the powers to form and promote companies, I'm a little unclear about some of the implications for that, given that regional strategic bodies are primarily funding bodies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary?
Thank you, Convener. This group of amendments concerns the general powers of regional boards. The power of giving regional boards like colleges explicit powers to form or promote companies, I think, is a sensible one. I can see no difficulty in so doing, and I think any funding body may wish to, on a regional basis, to find opportunities to take their work forward by this means. So I am supportive of that amendment. Liz Smith is right about 186. It does seem to be a rather odd thing to do. I don't see why we should be seeking to legislate for this level of prescription, because we don't do so for other bodies, and therefore I can see no reason to support it. Amendment 188 seeks to amend paragraph 14 of the new Schedule 2B to the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 2005, so that in addition to property, a regional board is unable to give a guarantee or indemnity over in respect of any other matter without the written consent of ministers. Paragraph 14 seeks to place regional boards and the SSC and incorporated colleges on the same legislative footing. The provisions would then be common to all. I see no reason why we should differentiate between them, which this amendment would do, and I understand the concern that Mr Bibby has now expressed, but I don't think it is a necessary precaution to make, and therefore I would invite the committee to reject the amendment.
Thank you. Can I call Neil Bibby to wind up and indicate whether he wishes to press or withdraw his amendment?
I'll just press the amendments.
The question is that Amendment 186 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not. Therefore, can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 186 to indicate? Thank you. Those against? Thanks. The result of the vote on Amendment number 186, there were 2 votes for, 7 votes against. Amendment 186 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 187 in the name of Colin Beattie, already debated with Amendment 186. Colin Beattie to move or not move? Move. The question is that Amendment 187 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Can I call Amendment 188 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 186. Neil Bibby to move or not move? The question is that Amendment 188 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can I ask, therefore, those members who wish to support Amendment 188 to vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment 188, 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 188 is disagreed to. The question is that Section 11 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 189 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 165, Cabinet Secretary to move formally? Move. The question is that Amendment 189 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 56? I apologise, I didn't hear you. Sorry. I'll say it again then. The question is that Amendment 189 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We're not agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 189 please vote now? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment number 189, 7 votes in favour, 2 votes against. Amendment 189 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 56 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77. Liz Smith to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can those who wish to support Amendment 56 please vote now? Those against? The result of the vote on Amendment 56, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 56 is disagreed to. The question is that Section 12 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 57 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77. Liz Smith to move or not move? Moved. The question is that Amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not all agreed. Can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 57 to please vote now? Thank you. Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 57, 4 votes in favour, 5 votes against. Amendment 57 is disagreed to. The question is that Section 13 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 150 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 136? Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move.
The question is that Amendment 150 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Can I call Amendment 151 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 136? Liz Smith to move or not move?
Not moving.
Not moving. Are members content not to move that? Content. Can I call Amendment 152 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with Amendment 136?
Similarly not moved.
Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Are members content not to move that? The question is that, done that. Can I move on to section 14, review of further and higher education? Can I call Amendment 190 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendments 191, 192 and 11? Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 190 and speak to other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Convener. Section 14 of the bill inserts a new Section 14A into the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 2005. The purpose of the new Section 14A is to give the SFC a power, with the consent of ministers, to review the extent to which fundable further or higher education is being provided by colleges and universities in a coherent manner. I know the concerns of the sector regarding the effect this provision may have on individual courses and institutions was a genuine one, and I acknowledge that, in particular the concern of University of Scotland. This section of the bill is not, and never has been, about eroding institutional autonomy. Throughout the consideration of the bill, I've made it clear that I support wholeheartedly the concept of responsible autonomy. There is a need for the SFC to take a more proactive and coherent view of both sectors to ensure we get the best value from our very significant investment in further and higher education. This is of critical importance if we're to be able to satisfy ourselves that the investment is delivering the best possible outcomes for learners and for the public purse, and I don't intend to step back from that. However, following discussions with sector representatives, I am bringing forward these amendments to the bill to achieve three things. The first amendment, 190, changes the structure and content of new Section 14A2 of the 2005 Act, which sets out particular matters to which a review under Section 14A1 may relate. This amendment does not alter the scope of the Section 14A1 review power. What Section 14A1 of the 2005 Act does is to confer on the SFC a power to conduct a review and a duty to report to ministers on that review, and no more. As I see things working in practice, the ultimate responsibility to respond to any review would rightly be on institutions and regional strategic bodies. Secondly, Amendment 191 introduces a specific duty for the Council to consult relevant staff, students and institutions in any review. That should give all concerned a reassurance that any review would be open, transparent and consultative. Finally, Amendment 192 makes provisions for the final review to be presented to ministers and the relevant post-16 bodies and regional strategic bodies. This is important because, as I say, in practice, the post-16 and regional bodies will be responsible for delivering and implementing any recommendations. New Section 14A of the 2005 Act is not, and never has been, about eroding institutional autonomy. What it does is to provide a further mechanism for ensuring proper accountability for our significant public investment. These amendments improve that, but do not impinge upon institutional autonomy in any way. And I invite the committee to support the amendments. The final amendment in this group from Joan McAlpine raises an important issue. I fully recognise the unique role the Crichton campus plays in the delivery of further and higher education in Dumfries and Galloway. I'm happy to put on record my continued and long-standing commitment to Crichton. It's absolutely essential that such local needs continue to be recognised by the Funding Council as a core part of the outcome agreement process, and what the Crichton does is unique and extremely significant in both a regional and national context. So I support the aims of the amendment, but I can't accept the amendment as presented. I have concerns about the precedent that would be set by legislating for a particular local authority area, and I also feel that the general review power contained in Section 14 would allow the SFC to achieve those ends. In January this year, I issued specific guidance to the Council, asking that they put in place processes to develop a consolidated outcome agreement for the Crichton. This would include a consolidated widening access agreement, which I think is a very useful step forward. And I think it's the right approach to secure a sustainable future for the campus as a whole. And on that basis, I would ask Joan McAlpine to withdraw Amendment 11, and I invite the committee to accept Amendments 190, 191 and 192 in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I call Joan McAlpine to speak to Amendment 11 and other amendments in the group?
Thank you very much, Convener. I appreciate the comments that the Cabinet Secretary has made about the Crichton campus. It's a very innovative and diverse campus, encapsulating a number of different higher and further education institutions on it, and it's a unique centre of learning and an important asset to the area. The purpose of my amendment is to ensure that the involvement of all relevant partners in the Crichton campus is placed firmly at the centre of planning of further and higher education in Dumfries and Galloway, and it makes specific provision to require the FSC, when it considers appropriate, to review the delivery of further and higher education in Dumfries and Galloway through consultation with the relevant partners on the Crichton campus. However, given the Minister's comments with regards to his recognition of the importance of the Crichton campus and the measures that he has already put in place to consult with all the relevant parties, I'm happy not to move the amendment.
Thank you very much. Can I call Liz Smith?
Thank you, Convener. I have to say I think these amendments are correct in terms of 190, 191 and 192. University of Scotland was adamant about the fact that higher education teaching needs to be coherent both throughout Scotland as a whole and within the region. So there's an appropriate role, I think, for the Funding Council in providing an overview. And this amendment 190, I think, strikes the right balance of powers between the institutions and the Funding Council, instead of the previous provision, which I think would have given the Scottish Funding Council specific powers to review individual courses or the number of higher educational fundable bodies in existence. I think that would have been contrary to the concept of responsible autonomy as we debated last week. Amendments 191, 192 continue that theme, most especially that there must be full consultation with the governing bodies in carrying out any review, and that the university itself is fully involved in that reporting process. I can't accept Amendment 11, which I think is unnecessary, particularly if 191 was accepted. I think it is overly prescriptive in terms of one area of Scotland, which I think possibly could lead to unintended consequences.
Thank you very much. Can I call Liam MacArthur?
Thank you very much, Convener. Similarly, I welcome Amendment 190 in terms of, I think, striking a better balance in terms of the relative roles and responsibilities. Likewise, 191 and 192, I think, enhance and broaden the level of consultation, and that's very much to be welcome. And similarly, in relation to Amendment 11, it does seem to show a lack of confidence in terms of the Cabinet Secretary's bill, perhaps, but as Liz Smith indicated, I think it is overly prescriptive, and I think the objectives that are sought through the amendment will be achieved otherwise through the bill. Thank you.
I call Neil Finlay.
In relation 190 to 192, we are supportive of. In terms of 11, I think we could all make the case for the uniqueness of education provision in our area, and I fear that should we go down this route, I suspect we might have another 31 amendments to follow, each claiming that their own local authority area has a certain uniqueness that we've got to put in the bill. I'm also a bit surprised that, given that the aim is to widen the consultation process, that the mover of the amendment didn't support Neil Bibby's amendments that sought to bring in community planning partners, transport providers and all the rest of it when considering education in specific areas.
Intervention?
Finished.
Members finished. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary to wind up?
Well, there seems to be agreement on the changes from 190 to 192, and I'm grateful for that, and I pay tribute to the members who said that, and also to University of Scotland and other stakeholders who have negotiated this, I think, in a very productive way. Can I simply say about the Amendment 11, I as a very strong and long-term supporter of the Crichton and Elizabeth Crichton's vision for the site, I think it is very important to recognise how unique it is, and those who don't know it well should go and have a look at it. But I think that the difficulty of placing in the bill is, as I've indicated, and I'm glad that the member has accepted that, but I do think that the Crichton deserves to be understood as a special intervention in Scotland, and one that should be encouraged particularly in the bringing together of a number of institutions on a single site, which retain their identity but are able to work together for educational purpose. That is quite a unique thing in Scotland.
Thank you very much. The question is that Amendment 190 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 191 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary? Already debated with Amendment 190. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 191 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 192 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 190? Cabinet Secretary, move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 192 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 11 in the name of Joan McAlpine, already debated with Amendment 190? Joan McAlpine, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Are members content for that not to be moved? Okay. The question is that Section 14 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 60 in the name of Marco Biaggi, already debated with Amendment 1? Marco Biaggi, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Are members content for that not to be moved? Can I call Amendment 61 in the name of Liam MacArthur, already debated with Amendment 1? Liam MacArthur, to move or not move?
Similarly not moved.
Again, are members content for that not to be moved? Agreed, right. Can I call Amendment 103 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 74? Cabinet Secretary, to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 103 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Could I ask members to speak up?
It just wasn't allowed in.
We are not agreed. Therefore, could those members who wish to support Amendment 103 please indicate now? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment number 103, 7 votes for, no votes against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 103 is agreed to. Moving on to the next group, we have the duty to provide information to Skills Development Scotland, and can I call Amendment 104 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, grouped with Amendments 106, 107, 108 and 62. Can I point out that if Amendment 108 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 62 because of preemption. Can I call the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 104 and speak to other amendments in the group?
The bill already allows ministers to require by order any person to provide information about a young person to SDS. However, I've been persuaded by SDS's view that it makes sense for ministers to have a similar power to require SDS themselves to share data. It may be, for example, that SDS holds data about a young person that could assist a college to support that person. Amendment 104 would give ministers a power by order to require SDS to share information of this nature. Amendments 106, 107, 108 all address points helpfully raised by the Subordinate Legislation Committee. 106 clarifies the powers of ministers to substitute or amend references to the Skills Development Scotland Company Limited with Section 15 of the Bill. 107 deletes Section 15(7)(b) of the Bill. 108 will make orders made under Section 15(1) of the Bill subject to the affirmative rather than the negative procedure. It will also provide that the new power being added as Section 15(2)(a) by Amendment 104 is subject to the same affirmative procedure. Orders under Section 15(5)(b) of the Bill, which is a minister's power to substitute references to SDS in Section 15 for references to a different person, will be subject to the negative procedure. Finally, orders under Section 15(5)(a) of the Bill, which is ministers' power to change references to SDS or any person substituted to SDS in Section 15 of the Bill in the event of a change of name of the person, will be subject to no procedure. Liam MacArthur's Amendment 62 does not achieve, alas, the recommendation of the Subordinate Legislation Committee by making all orders made under Section 15 subject to affirmative procedure, except those as a consequence of a change of name. Given that the Amendment 108 will see Section 15 amended to meet the recommendation of the Subordinate Legislation Committee in relation to the types of procedure which will attach to orders made under Section 15, I see no reason why the amendment is necessary, and I would therefore invite Mr MacArthur to withdraw it unless it is preempted, of course.
Thank you. Can I call Liam MacArthur to speak to Amendment 62 and other amendments in the group?
Thank you very much, Convener. I think one of the few upsides to the travel disruption I encountered earlier on this year is I actually missed the evidence session that SDS gave, although I have read it, and I know from speaking to colleagues it was a unifying force in terms of bringing together the committee on that issue, if on a few others. I'm reassured that some of the earlier initial concerns about the powers being sought here were perhaps not as wide-ranging as initially feared, that we were not looking to create some sort of Uber database. Nevertheless, my initial attempt at lodging amendment, which would have removed this entirely, was considered to be a wrecking amendment, and I know the Cabinet Secretary would consider this entirely uncharacteristic, that I would be as bold as to put down a wrecking amendment. I sought another way of achieving the same end. I recognise Amendment 108 in the Cabinet Secretary's name achieves much the same as I am seeking to achieve. I do think that there is a need for additional scrutiny to to that is in the bill at present. So on that basis, I am inclined to support 108, which will see the preemption of my own amendment.
Are you seeking to withdraw?
I'm seeking to withdraw.
Do any members object to the withdrawal? Thank you. Cabinet Secretary to wind up.
I think that I've made all the points I can possibly make.
Much. The question is that Amendment 104 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, would those members who wish to support Amendment 104 please show now. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 104, 7 votes for, no votes against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 104 is agreed to. Can I call Amendments 105, 106, 107 and 108, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated? Can I remind, well, that's already been withdrawn by Miles MacArthur, so can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 105 to 108 on block?
Moved on block.
Can I ask if any member objects to a single question being put on Amendments 105 to 108? No. The question is that Amendments 105 to 108 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? You agreed that it would be put on block? No. No. Right. We'll have to do them individually. Therefore, can I? Yeah. Yeah. The question is that Amendment 105 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support 105 please show it now. Those against? Abstentions? Result of the vote on Amendment number 105, 7 votes for, no votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 105 is therefore agreed to. The question is that Amendment 106 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Those members who wish to support Amendment 106, please show. Against? Abstentions?
Yes. Oh, there we go.
The result of the vote on Amendment number 106, 7 votes for, no votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 106 is therefore agreed to. The question is that Amendment 107 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not all agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 107 please vote now. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment number 107, 7 votes for, no votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 107 is therefore agreed to. The question is that Amendment 108 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, could those members who wish to support Amendment 108 please vote now. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 108 is 7 votes for, no votes against and 2 abstentions. Amendment 108 is agreed to. The question is that Section 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that Section 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Can I call Amendment 109 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 72? Cabinet Secretary to move formally. The question is that Amendment 109 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. Can I call Amendment 110 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 72? Cabinet Secretary to move formally. The question is that Amendment 110 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Moving on to the next group, power to vary board size, parliamentary procedure. Call Amendment 111 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendments 126, 127 and 128. Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 111 and speak to all amendments in the group.
Group 9. Is that it? Sorry, 1 second. I seem to have been moving too fast. Convener, Amendment 126, I shall come on to Amendment 111 in a moment, but Amendment 126 fulfills a commitment given to the Subordinate Legislation Committee. It provides that an order establishing a regional board or designating a fundable post-16 education body as a regional strategic body would be subject to affirmative procedure. An affirmative order would also be required if an order sought to remove a regional strategic body from Schedule 2A of the 2005 Act, except if such an order was simply because the body had closed or ceased to exist. Amendment 128 also fulfills a commitment given to the Subordinate Legislation Committee. It amends Section 34 of the 2005 Act to provide that an order under paragraph 18 of Schedule 2B to the Act to vary the constitution or general powers of a regional board would be subject to the affirmative procedure, except where it does no more than vary the minimum or maximum board size, in which case the negative procedure would apply. Amendment 111, given that the subordinate legislation's comments on regional boards and its concerns about amending primary legislation by negative procedure is required because it provides consistency in relation to the procedure for varying the constitution of incorporated college boards as set out in the 1992 Act. The amendment alters the procedures so that such orders are affirmative, except where they do no more than amend the minimum or maximum board size, in which case a negative procedure would continue to apply. I hope providing for additional scrutiny in this regard is welcome. I also intend to bring forward an amendment at stage 3 so that orders that amend the powers of colleges in section 12.2 of the Further and Higher Education Scotland Act 1992 are subject to affirmative procedure as well. Amendment 127 addresses a concern raised by the Subordinate Legislation Committee as well. It concerns the order-making powers under Section 4 of the Bill on the tuition fees cap. The committee did not feel that the negative procedure represented an appropriate level of scrutiny for the exercise of this power, and it suggested that the affirmative procedure was more appropriate if fee levels were being raised to a level that exceeded real terms increases. Amendment 127 amends Section 34 of the 2005 Act to achieve this. I invite, therefore, the committee to support Amendments 126, 128, 111, 127.
Thank you very much. Can I call Liam MacArthur?
Thank you, Convener. Just very briefly, I know from the briefing we've received from Scottish colleges that they have been taking legal advice in relation to Amendments 111 and 127. I don't have any problem in relation to 126, although 128, I think there was a concern that that wasn't under affirmative procedure. Be grateful for the Cabinet Secretary's clarification on that. But in relation to 111, 127, I just wonder whether he might be inclined to take the advice he'd been, or the offer that he'd handed to some of us in relation to earlier amendments, to withdraw at this stage, reflect further, maybe bring back at stage 3, subject to whatever legal advice Scottish colleges are taking in the interim. Thank you.
Call the Cabinet Secretary to wind up the debate.
Well, I have seen no such legal advice from Scotland's colleges, nor I don't think any such communication from Scotland's colleges. What I will give a commitment to is if we pass these on this occasion and that advice comes forward, then obviously I'll consider it again. And if any amendments are required at stage 3, we'll bring them. But I've seen and we've had no such communication. So therefore I'm completely unsighted on that piece of information. I would want to proceed with these in the light of the recommendations they arise out, the recommendations of the Subordinate Legislation Committee. So I think I really have to press them.
The question is that Amendment 111 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 112 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary? Already debated with Amendment 77. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Move.
The question is that Amendment 112 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 63 in the name of Liz Smith? Already debated with Amendment 77. Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 63 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 64 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77, Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 64 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 65 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77, Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 65 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 113 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 77, Cabinet Secretary to move formally?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 113 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 114 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 77, and can I remind members that if Amendment 114 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendments 66 and 67 because of preemption. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 114 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Yeah. Can I call Amendment 115 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 115 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. Can I call Amendment 68 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77? Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 68 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 68 to please indicate? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 68, 4 votes for, 5 votes against. Amendment 68 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 69 in the name of Liz Smith, already debated with Amendment 77? Liz Smith to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 69 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 116 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 77? Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 116 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 117 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 77? And can I remind members that if Amendment 117 is agreed to, I cannot call Amendment 70 because of preemption. The Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 117 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Can I call Amendment 153 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with Amendment 149? Neil Findlay to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 153 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. When those members who wish to support Amendment 153, please vote now. Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 153, 2 votes in favour, 7 against. Amendment 153 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendment 193 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, already debated with Amendment 149? And I remind members that Amendment 193 is agreed to. I cannot call Amendments 194 and 195 because of preemption. Cabinet Secretary to move formally.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 193 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Can those members who wish to support Amendment 193 please show now? Okay. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 193 was as follows: 6 votes for, 2 votes against and 1 abstention. Amendment 193 is agreed to. Can I call Amendment 154 in the name of Neil Findlay, already debated with Amendment 149? Neil Findlay to move or not move?
Sorry, can you just...
Amendment, can I call Amendment 154 in the name of Neil Findlay?
Sorry.
Moved. The question is that Amendment 154 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We're not all agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 154 please vote now? Those against? The vote on Amendment 154, 2 votes in favour, 7 votes against. Amendment 154 is disagreed to. Moving on to the next group, public appointments. Can I call Amendment 118 in the name of the Cabinet Secretary, group with Amendment 196? Cabinet Secretary to move Amendment 118 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Convener, Amendment 118 achieves regulation of the ministerial appointment of chairs of regional colleges and regional boards under the Public Appointments Code by making provision for the bill to add these offices to Schedule 2 to the Public Appointments and Public Bodies, etc. Scotland Act. I believe that this is highly appropriate and indeed a central element of improved accountability necessary that the chairs of regional colleges and regional boards are ministerial appointments. There is precedent for this across public bodies in Scotland. It is essential that there is a fair and open process underpinning these appointments, and regulation under the Public Appointments Code provides that assurance. My officials have shared our proposals in this regard with the Public Appointments Commissioner's Office. Therefore, pleased to bring forward Amendment 118. I thank Mr Bibby for his related amendment, number 196, which seeks to add the chairs of colleges assigned to regional strategic bodies to the list of offices in the same Schedule 2 to the Public Appointments and Public Bodies, etc. Scotland Act. However, the amendment is technically deficient, as in the terms of that Act, only ministerial appointments can fall within the remit of the Public Appointments Commissioner. And the bill provides that the chair of an assigned college, which is an incorporated college, would, subject to limited exceptions, be appointed by the regional strategic body, not by ministers. The bill makes no provision in relation to the appointment of a chair of an assigned college, which is not an incorporated college, that being a matter to be dealt with by the relevant college's constitution. I therefore cannot support Amendment 196.
Thank you very much. Can I call Neil Bibby to speak to Amendment 196 and other amendments in the group?
Thanks, Convener. I'll try and keep my remarks brief as it's the last group and there's only two amendments. Amendment 118 supports the public appointments procedure, appointments of chairs of boards for regional colleges. I agree with the Cabinet Secretary on the importance of openness and transparency. I believe that's vitally important. I believe my Amendment 196 would make it apply to assigned colleges, and that is also important to do that as well. In terms of the Cabinet Secretary's remarks about the amendment being deficient, I think, I don't know if he does irony, but I would certainly suggest the bill was deficient. Never mind my amendment, but I'm happy to press 196 amendment.
Cabinet Secretary, to wind up.
I think I've made the points. The amendment is regrettably technically deficient. The ministerial appointments can only fall in the way that I've described, and therefore the amendment is that. I can't avoid that fact. That is simply a fact.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 118 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Can I call Amendment 196 in the name of Neil Bibby, already debated with Amendment 118. Neil Bibby, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 196 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed, therefore can those supporting Amendment 196 please vote now? Those against? Thank you. The result of the vote on Amendment number 196, total votes for, 2 against, 7. Amendment 196 is disagreed to. Can I call Amendments 119, 120, 121, 122, 155 and 10, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated? Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move Amendments 119 to 122, 155 and 10 on block?
Moved on block.
Can I remind members that if they object to or wish to vote against either any or all of the amendments in this group, then they should not agree to it being put on block. But can I ask whether any member objects to a single question being put on Amendments 119 to 122, 155 and 10? We'll take them individually then. Okay. The question is that Amendment 119 be agreed to. Are members agreed? We're not agreed. Therefore, can those members who wish to support Amendment 119 please show? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment number 119, 7 votes for, no votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 119 is agreed to. The question is that Amendment 120 be agreed to. Are members agreed to 120? No. We're not agreed. Therefore, can I ask those members who wish to support Amendment 120 please vote now? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote on Amendment 120, 7 votes for, no votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 120 is agreed to. The question is that Amendment 121 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Would those members who wish to support Amendment 121 please vote now? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the vote of Amendment 121, 7 votes for, 0 votes against, 2 abstentions. Amendment 121 is agreed to. The question is that Amendment 122 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Are we all agreed? We are agreed. 122. The question is that Amendment 155 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. Can I call Amendment 6 in the name of Liam MacArthur? Already debated with Amendment 1. Liam MacArthur to move or not move?
Not moved.
Not moved. Does any member object to that not being moved? Okay. Can I call amendments 123, 124, 125, 126, 127, 128, 129 and 130, all in the name of the Cabinet Secretary and all previously debated? Can I invite the Cabinet Secretary to move amendments 123 to 130 on block?
Moved on block.
Can I ask whether any member objects to a single question being put on amendments 123 to 130?
Yes.
Right, we will take them individually. The question is that amendment 123 is agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that amendment 124 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that amendment 125 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are not all agreed. Therefore, could those members who wish to support amendment 125 please show? Those against? The result of the vote on amendment 125, 7 votes in favour, 2 votes against. Amendment 125 is agreed to. The question is that amendment 126 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. The question is that amendment 127 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that 128 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that amendment 129 is agreed to. Are we all agreed? The question is that amendment 130 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that the schedule be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that sections 17 to 19 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The question is that the long title be agreed to. Are we all agreed? You'll be delighted to know that that ends stage 2 consideration of the bill. The bill will be reprinted as amended and will be available tomorrow. The Parliament has not yet determined when stage 3 will take place, but members can now lodge stage 3 amendments with the legislation team. Members will be informed of the final deadline for amendments once the stage 3 date has been determined. And as members voted to hold item 4 on our agenda in private, I now close this meeting to the public.